The Dare by Elle Kennedy from Briar U series. Welcome to VideoBooks YouTube channel. I won't ask you to like or subscribe, because I know you've already done that. I'll ask you to comment where you're watching the video from. Welcome to the complete chapter-by-chapter breakdown of The Dare by Elle Kennedy. This novel is a popular installment in the Briar U series, which is a spin-off of the author's beloved off-campus hockey romance world. The story captures the essence of contemporary college romance, combining humor, intense emotional growth, and a classic opposites-attract dynamic that explores themes of self-discovery, stepping out of comfort zones, and the power of vulnerability. The narrative centers on Taylor Marsh and Connor Edwards, two university students who seem to inhabit completely different social universes. Taylor is a college junior who is smart, analytical, and deeply insecure about her appearance and social standing due to a lifetime of comparing herself to her more conventional peers. She struggles with low self-esteem, which is exacerbated by a toxic sorority environment where her inclusion often feels provisional and dependent on her compliance with superficial rules. Connor, on the other hand, is a star player for the Briar University hockey team, a popular, effortlessly charming, and attractive athlete who seems to have the world handed to him on a silver platter. Behind his carefree persona, however, Connor is a fiercely loyal person who is protective of his friends and carries his own pressures to succeed. The entire trajectory of their lives shifts due to a single, reckless challenge during a party game. When Taylor is dared by her sorority sisters to approach the handsome hockey player and ask him out, she expects to be publicly rejected and humiliated. Instead, Connor surprises everyone by playing along, a decision that sparks an unexpected fake dating arrangement that soon deepens into a profound and authentic emotional connection. This extensive chapter-by-chapter summary will chart every milestone of their journey across 43 distinct chapters and an epilogue, tracking how a simple college prank dismantles their preconceptions, forces them to confront their inner anxieties, and ultimately leads to an enduring, passionate love story. Chapter 1 begins from Taylor Marsh's perspective, establishing her complex relationship with university social life and her deep-seated insecurities. Taylor is a junior at Briar University who joined the Kappa Chi sorority in an attempt to reinvent herself, hoping to move past the lingering ugly duckling complex that has plagued her since childhood. She grew up under the shadow of a strikingly beautiful, academically brilliant single mother, which inadvertently fueled Taylor's struggles with body image and self-esteem. Instead of finding a supportive sisterhood in her sorority, Taylor finds herself on the periphery of a group controlled by judgmental and manipulative girls who constantly make her feel as though her inclusion is provisional. The primary conflict of the chapter unfolds at a chaotic Greek row party hosted by a campus fraternity, an event Taylor is mandated to attend. Her evening takes a highly stressful turn when her sorority nemesis corners her into a high-stakes party game called Dare or Dare. Knowing that Taylor is shy and anxious about her appearance, the toxic sorority sisters design a challenge explicitly meant to humiliate her in front of the crowd. The Dare demands that Taylor approach Connor Edwards, the wildly popular, effortlessly attractive new junior transfer student on the varsity hockey team, and successfully seduce him or face complete social exile from the house. The narrative shifts to Taylor's inner panic as she surveys the crowded party to locate her target. Connor is legendary on campus not just for his skills on the ice, but for his easygoing California surfer boy charm and his highly active dating life. Taylor feels entirely invisible compared to the conventional campus beauties Connor usually spends time with, and she braces herself for immediate public rejection as she forces her feet to move toward him across the packed living room. When she finally reaches him and blurts out a desperate, unconventional proposition, she fully expects him to laugh in her face and solidify her status as a social outcast. The chapter reaches its emotional peak when Connor completely defies her expectations. Instead of mocking her or turning her away to maintain his popular athlete status, Connor takes one look at Taylor's terrified, earnest expression and reads the desperation behind her request. Seeing an opportunity to play a clever prank of his own and disrupt the arrogant expectations of the sorority girls watching from across the room, Connor offers Taylor a shocking lifeline. He agrees to play along, taking her by the hand and leading her upstairs to an empty bedroom so they can pretend to get busy, instantly flipping the script on her tormentors. The chapter concludes from Taylor's perspective as she sits in the quiet room with the campus golden boy, her heart racing not from humiliation, but from the sudden, exhilarating realization that her survival tactic has just thrown her into an unpredictable alliance with the most charming guy at Briar University. Chapter 2 shifts to Connor Edwards' perspective, opening in the quiet sanctuary of the upstairs bedroom where he and Taylor have retreated to escape the chaotic fraternity party below. Connor is immediately established as a character who possesses a sharp, perceptive emotional intelligence that contrasts with his superficial reputation as a carefree, laid-back athlete. He takes a moment to assess Taylor, observing her visible relief and the lingering tension in her shoulders. Connor is highly amused by the entire situation, finding Taylor's blunt honesty and her distinct lack of the usual star-struck behavior displayed by his campus admirers to be a refreshing change of pace. The primary conflict of the chapter explores Connor's internal motivations and his current standing at Briar University. As a junior transfer student from a university in California, Connor is under immense pressure to secure his position on the elite Briar varsity hockey team, which requires him to maintain a spotless public record and avoid any unnecessary drama that could catch the negative attention of his demanding coach. He reflects on his interaction with Taylor's sorority sisters, expressing a deep distaste for the casual cruelty and social manipulation he observed from the girls downstairs. Connor decides to turn the situation into a calculated rebellion against the Greek system's toxic hierarchy, using his popularity as a shield to help Taylor save face while satisfying his own desire to disrupt the arrogant expectations of the party crowd. The narrative shifts to a detailed conversation between the two unlikely allies as they orchestrate their fake hookup. Sitting together in the bedroom, Connor helps Taylor brainstorm a convincing narrative to present to her sorority, realizing that simply sitting in a room together won't be enough to satisfy her highly suspicious peers. He demonstrates his easygoing charm by guiding her through the specific details they need to fabricate, ensuring their stories align perfectly. Throughout their discussion, Connor finds himself genuinely intrigued by Taylor's sharp wit, her intelligence, and her hidden resilience, noticing that her self-deprecating humor masks a highly capable and compelling personality that he wants to get to know better. The chapter reaches its emotional peak when the designated time expires and Connor prepares to escort Taylor back down into the crowded fraternity house. Before they open the door to face the scrutiny of the party, Connor steps close to Taylor and deliberately musses his own hair and adjusts his clothing, creating a convincing image of a passionate encounter. He catches Taylor's gaze, offering her a warm, reassuring smile that instantly calms her remaining panic. The chapter concludes from Connor's viewpoint as he takes Taylor's hand and leads her down the grand staircase into the flashing lights and music of the main room. Completely aware that by publicly claiming an association with the smart, unconventional junior, he has just set off a chain reaction that will thoroughly upend both of their social lives at Briar University. Chapter 3 returns to Taylor Marsh's perspective on the morning after the fraternity party, capturing the immediate, complicated aftermath of her successful dare. The narrative opens in the bustling kitchen of the Kappa Chi sorority house, where Taylor is instantly confronted by a wave of unexpected attention from her peers. The toxic sorority sisters who had orchestrated the prank to humiliate her are visibly shocked and deeply frustrated that Taylor actually walked out of the bedroom hand in hand with the varsity hockey star. Taylor finds herself thrust into an uncomfortable spotlight, forced to recount the fabricated details of her passionate encounter with Connor while maintaining her bubbly, confident facade. The primary conflict of the chapter intensifies as Taylor realizes that her social victory has created a brand new set of expectations that she's completely unprepared to meet. The leader of the sorority, suspicious of the sudden pairing, subtly pressures Taylor to secure a genuine second date with Connor to prove that the hookup wasn't just a fluke, hinting that Taylor's standing in the house still depends on her ability to keep the popular athlete's attention. This creates a deep sense of panic for Taylor, who knows that the entire scenario was merely a generous act of charity from a guy who moves in a completely different social echelon. She feels trapped between the crushing pressure of her sorority and the reality of her own deep-seated insecurities regarding her body image and worth. The narrative shifts to a chance encounter later that afternoon on the main campus quad. Taylor is walking to the university library, her mind heavy with stress, when she spots Connor standing with a group of his loud hockey teammates. Attempting to avoid any further awkwardness, Taylor tries to slip past the group unnoticed, fully expecting Connor to ignore her now that they are out of the party environment. To her complete surprise, Connor spots her through the crowd, breaks away from his teammates without a second thought, and jogs over to greet her with a bright, familiar smile that completely throws her off balance. The chapter reaches its emotional peak during their quiet conversation on the campus walkway, away from the prying eyes of the student body. Instead of treating her like a temporary joke, Connor listens carefully as Taylor reluctantly confesses the ongoing pressure she's facing from her sorority house. Demonstrating his characteristic protective streak and his easygoing charm, Connor refuses to let her become a target for her peers again. He proposes that they extend their agreement into full, public fake dating arrangement, arguing that it will keep her sorority sisters off her back while giving him a reliable, drama-free cover to keep his coach happy. The chapter concludes from Taylor's perspective as she accepts his hand, her heart hammering with a mixture of terror and exhilarating hope as she officially steps into a web of public lies with the most desirable guy on campus. Chapter 4 shifts back to Connor Edwards' perspective, providing an inside look at the varsity hockey team's dynamic and his own evolving thoughts regarding Taylor. The chapter opens inside the high-energy environment of the Briar University ice rink locker room, where Connor is gearing up for an intense morning practice. His teammates, having caught wind of the rumors circulating on campus about his sudden exit from the party with Taylor, waste no time in teasing him and pressing for details. Connor handles the locker room banter with his usual easygoing humor, deliberately keeping the details vague to protect Taylor's privacy while letting his teammates believe whatever they want, though he is internally surprised by how protective he already feels over her reputation. The primary conflict of the chapter deepens during a tense post-practice meeting with the varsity hockey coach. The coach emphasizes the absolute necessity of team discipline and maintaining a stable, distraction-free lifestyle off the ice, especially for Connor as a new junior transfer who needs to prove his long-term commitment to the program. This conversation solidifies Connor's belief that his fake dating arrangement with Taylor is actually a perfect strategic move for his own career. By appearing to be in a stable, low-drama relationship with a smart, responsible student, he can keep management happy and completely avoid the messy campus gossip that usually follows his casual dating life. The narrative shifts to later that evening when Connor meets up with Taylor at a quiet off-campus diner to officially map out the ground rules for their public arrangement. As they sit in a corner booth over coffee, Connor observes Taylor's nervous energy and her tendency to hide behind self-deprecating jokes about her appearance and social status. He uses his effortless charm to put her at ease, treating the fake relationship like a fun, shared project rather than a chore. They agree on the logistics of their public appearances, including how often they should be seen together on campus, how to handle social media posts, and how to make their interactions look entirely genuine to any onlookers. The chapter reaches its emotional peak as Connor leans across the table and insists on adding one final, crucial rule to their agreement: complete honesty between the two of them behind closed doors. He tells Taylor that while they are lying to the rest of the university, they must never lie to each other, establishing a safe zone where they can both drop their public masks. He watches the surprise and vulnerability soften her expression, realizing that beneath her defensive walls lies a deeply genuine person he is becoming increasingly drawn to. The chapter concludes from Connor's viewpoint as they leave the diner together into the cool night air, with Connor fully aware that what started as a simple party dare is rapidly turning into an arrangement that feels less like a game and more like something dangerously real. Chapter 5 returns to Taylor Marsh's perspective as the reality of her public alliance with Connor Edwards begins to alter her daily routine on campus. The morning begins with Taylor meticulously selecting an outfit for a study date they had scheduled at the university library, an exercise that brings all her physical insecurities right to the surface. She finds herself overanalyzing her appearance, wondering if she looks too plain or if she's trying too hard to fit the mold of the girls Connor usually dates. When she arrives at the library, she feels a familiar stab of anxiety as she sees him waiting for her at a highly visible table near the main entrance, his massive athletic frame completely drawing the attention of passing students. The primary conflict of the chapter intensifies during their study session, which serves as their first official public appearance as a couple. Taylor is acutely aware of the whispers and sidelong glances from other students, particularly a group of underclassmen girls who look at her with an undeniable mixture of confusion and judgment. Connor, completely unfazed by the attention, handles the situation with absolute grace. He deliberately sits close to her, sharing his notes and leaning in to whisper light-hearted jokes that make her laugh, effectively projecting the image of a doting boyfriend. However, the internal struggle for Taylor remains fierce. She finds it incredibly difficult to separate Connor's calculated performance from her own growing, genuine attraction to his warmth and humor. The narrative shifts to a deeper, more private conversation when Connor notices her underlying tension and suggests they take a break from the crowded study hall. They walk out to a secluded courtyard behind the science building, where the heavy pressure of the campus gaze finally lifts. Free from their audience, Taylor confronts Connor about the sheer absurdity of their arrangement, expressing her fear that everyone will eventually see through the lie because they simply do not look like they belong together. Instead of offering a superficial compliment, Connor challenges her harsh self-assessment, questioning why she allows the shallow standards of her sorority sisters to dictate her self-worth. The chapter reaches its emotional peak during this quiet confrontation, as Connor's genuine frustration with her low self-esteem forces Taylor to confront the depth of her own emotional wounds. He steps directly into her personal space, his gaze intense and completely devoid of his usual playful banter, and tells her that he wouldn't be standing out here with her if he didn't genuinely enjoy her company. His fierce defense of her value catches Taylor completely off guard, melting a piece of the defensive armor she has worn for years. The chapter concludes from Taylor's perspective as they walk back toward the main campus, her hand brushing against his. The comforting warmth of the gesture leaves her completely terrified, not because of her sorority's threats, but because she realizes she's falling completely and helplessly in love with a man who is supposed to be just a temporary shield. Chapter 6 shifts back to Connor Edwards' perspective, opening on the day of a major home game for the Briar University hockey team. The atmosphere inside the varsity arena is electric, filled with the roar of a sold-out crowd and the sharp, familiar sense of ice shavings, leather, and sweat. Connor is entirely focused during the pre-game warm-ups, pushing his body to the limit to cement his position on the top offensive line. Throughout the intense match, he delivers a stellar performance, executing a critical assist that secures a massive victory for Briar. Despite the high adrenaline rush of the win and the raucous celebrations in the locker room afterward, Connor finds his thoughts drifting away from the ice and toward the stands, scanning the crowd for a specific face. The primary conflict of the chapter develops during the post-game mixer held at a popular off-campus sports bar, where the players gather to celebrate with students and alumni. Taylor arrives at the packed venue to fulfill her part of their public agreement, looking stunning, but clearly fighting off a wave of social anxiety as she navigates the loud, high-energy environment. Connor spots her the moment she walks through the door, immediately breaking away from a group of wealthy boosters to guide her over to the team's private VIP booth. The contrast between his public status as the celebrated man of the hour and his quiet, attentive focus on Taylor becomes the central focus of the room, drawing heavy scrutiny from both his teammates and several prominent Greek life members in attendance. The narrative shifts to an intense moment of social confrontation when a group of senior hockey players and their dates, including a few high-ranking girls from Taylor's rival sorority, join the booth. The conversation quickly turns passive-aggressive as one of the popular girls makes a thinly veiled, derogatory comment about Taylor's choice of style and her sudden, unexpected presence in the varsity inner circle. Before Taylor can even formulate a defensive reply, Connor completely shuts down the hostility. He wraps a heavy, protective arm around Taylor's shoulders, pulling her close and addressing the group with an icy, uncharacteristic sharpness that leaves no room for debate, making it absolutely clear to everyone in the room that disrespecting Taylor means crossing him. The chapter reaches its emotional peak later that night as the party begins to wind down and Connor walks Taylor back to her vehicle in the cold, quiet darkness of the parking lot. The high adrenaline of the game and the defensive tension of the mixer melt away, leaving a raw, heavy silence between them. Taylor looks up at him, her eyes bright with a mixture of profound gratitude and overwhelming vulnerability, as she thanks him for standing up for her so fiercely in front of his peers. Connor, looking down at her under the amber glow of the streetlights, realizes with sudden, terrifying clarity that his protective actions are no longer driven by a tactical desire to appease his coach or win a campus game. The chapter concludes from Connor's viewpoint as he reaches out to gently tuck a stray lock of hair behind her ear, his heart thumping hard against his ribs as he accepts that the line between their public performance and his private reality has completely vanished, leaving him deeply in love with the one girl he is supposed to be pretending to date. Chapter 7 returns to Taylor Marsh's perspective on the afternoon following the post-game mixer, finding her back inside the high-stakes environment of the Kappa Chi sorority house. The atmosphere in the common room is thick with a new kind of tension. The passive-aggressive comments from her sisters have shifted into a cautious, almost desperate desire for proximity. Because Connor publicly defended her at the sports bar, Taylor has suddenly become a person of immense social capital within her house. The very girls who used to ignore her or orchestrate humiliating pranks are now inviting her to sit with them, pressing her for intimate details about the star hockey player and trying to use her connection to gain access to the varsity inner circle. The primary conflict of the chapter deepens as Taylor experiences a profound sense of disillusionment with her social surroundings. Standing in the middle of the crowded house, she realizes that the sisterhood she works so hard to belong to is entirely superficial, based solely on what leverage or status a person can provide. This realization makes her feel incredibly isolated, as she's forced to play along and smile while internally recoiling from their sudden, fake friendliness. Her stress levels peak when the sorority president suggests that Kappa Chi should host a joint mixer with the varsity hockey team, putting the pressure squarely on Taylor's shoulders to convince Connor to bring his teammates to the house. The narrative shifts to later that evening when Taylor meets Connor at his off-campus apartment to study and decompress. Walking into his space, which is cluttered with hockey gear, textbooks, and comfortable furniture, she immediately feels the heavy burden of her campus persona lift. As they sit on the living room rug surrounded by open textbooks, Taylor reluctantly tells him about the sorority's request for a joint mixer, apologizing profusely for how her sisters are trying to exploit their fake relationship. Connor listens quietly, his expressive eyes tracking the exhaustion etched into her face, and he surprises her once again by immediately agreeing to organize the event, telling her that he is happy to do whatever it takes to secure her position in the house. The chapter reaches its emotional peak during the quiet hours of the night as they finish their schoolwork and remain talking on the floor. Taylor looks at Connor, overwhelmed by his unyielding generosity and the easy, comfortable way he fits into her life, and she decides to take a massive emotional risk. For the first time, she opens up to him about her childhood, describing what it was like to grow up with a mother who was effortlessly perfect, and how that environment fostered her deep-seated belief that she would never be enough for someone as popular and attractive as him. Connor handles her vulnerability with immense tenderness, closing the physical distance between them and taking her hands in his. He looks directly into her eyes and tells her that her sisters are entirely blind if they cannot see how incredible she is on her own merits, completely independent of him or anyone else. The chapter concludes from Taylor's perspective as she sits in the quiet room with him, the warmth of his hand sending a thrill through her veins as she realizes that the fake dating game has given her the safest, most genuine connection she has ever known, leaving her deeply terrified of the day when the lie must finally end. Chapter 8 shifts back to Connor Edwards' perspective as he begins to lay the groundwork for the joint mixer between the varsity hockey team and the Kappa Chi sorority. The chapter opens during a chaotic team dinner at a local grill where the hockey players are unwinding after a grueling week of training. When Connor introduces the idea of the mixer, his teammates are instantly on board, excited by the prospect of a high-profile party on Greek Row. Connor uses his natural leadership to set strict boundaries for the evening, subtly reminding his friends to treat Taylor and her housemates with respect, showing how deeply invested he has become in protecting Taylor's social environment. The primary conflict of the chapter surfaces when Connor returns to his apartment and receives an unexpected phone call from his father. The conversation is tense and strained, exposing the heavy family expectations that Connor usually hides behind his easygoing California persona. His father drops a reminder about the high stakes of Connor's junior year, emphasizing that his athletic performance and campus reputation need to be absolutely flawless if he wants to secure a professional scouting contract after graduation. This interaction highlights the immense pressure Connor faces to maintain his golden boy image, making him realize that his carefree attitude is often a necessary shield against the overwhelming demands of his family legacy. The narrative shifts to the next day on campus when Connor meets up with Taylor to finalize the schedule for the upcoming party. They find a quiet bench near the university lake, away from the bustling student traffic. As they review the logistics, Connor notices that Taylor seems lighter and more confident than she did during their first week together, her quick wit and bright laughter coming more naturally to her. He finds himself entirely captivated by her genuine personality, realizing that their scheduled meetings have quickly become the absolute highlight of his week, providing a rare sanctuary where he does not have to pretend to be perfect. The chapter reaches its emotional peak as a sudden summer rainstorm catches them by surprise, forcing them to run for cover under the large awning of a nearby campus pavilion. Standing close together in the cold, damp air as the rain pours around them, the playful banter between them softens into a heavy, charged silence. Connor looks down at Taylor, observing the raindrops catching in her hair and the breathless smile on her face, and the urge to pull her into his arms becomes almost completely undeniable. The chapter concludes from Connor's viewpoint as he restrains himself, keeping his hands at his sides to honor their agreement, but his heart pounds with the terrifying realization that he is no longer just playing a part for the campus audience. He is completely and helplessly falling for his fake girlfriend. Chapter 9 returns to Taylor Marsh's perspective on the night of the highly anticipated joint mixer between the Kappa Chi sorority and the varsity hockey team. The chapter opens inside the sorority house, which has been transformed into a high-energy party venue with flashing lights, loud music, and a crowded dance floor. Taylor stands near the main entrance, her nerves stretched to the absolute limit as she waits for the hockey team to arrive. She's acutely aware that her entire social standing within the house hinges on this night, and she fears that any slip-up will reveal the fake nature of her relationship with Connor, destroying the fragile respect she has recently gained from her peers. The primary conflict of the chapter ignites when the front doors swing open and Connor enters at the head of a large group of his boisterous, athletic teammates. The moment he steps into the foyer, his eyes scan the crowded room, bypassing the flashier girls who immediately tried to catch his attention and lock onto Taylor. He walks straight toward her with an easy, confident stride, a warm smile breaking across his handsome face. To the absolute shock of the watching sorority sisters, Connor greets Taylor by pulling her into a tight, affectionate embrace, completely validating her status in front of the entire house and sending a clear signal to everyone present that she is his central focus. The narrative shifts to the middle of the party, where the initial tension begins to melt away into a night of genuine fun and celebration. Connor remains firmly by Taylor's side for the first hour, introducing her to his closest friends on the team, and ensuring she feels completely included in their lively conversations. His teammates treat Taylor with immense warmth and respect, clearly following Connor's unspoken lead. As Taylor looks around the room, she notices the stunned, envious expressions on the faces of her former tormentors, realizing that the power dynamic in the sorority has permanently shifted in her favor, allowing her to finally hold her head high in a space where she once felt completely invisible. The chapter reaches its emotional peak later in the evening when the crowd moves out onto the back patio to escape the heat of the dance floor. Under the cover of the dim string lights and the cool night air, Connor leads Taylor to a quiet corner away from the noise of the music. The playful, performative energy of the party drops away, leaving a heavy, breathless intimacy between them. Taylor looks up at him, her heart hammering against her ribs as she tries to find the words to thank him for everything he has done for her tonight. Before she can speak, Connor leans down, his gaze dropping to her lips with an intensity that makes her breath hitch, erasing the final boundaries of their arrangement and leaving them both standing on the precipice of a reality that is no longer a game. Chapter 10 shifts back to Connor Edwards' perspective, picking up directly from the breathless, high-stakes moment on the dark back patio of the sorority house. The noise of the music and the muffled laughter of the party fade into the background as Connor stands in the dim light, looking down at Taylor. The overwhelming urge to bridge the remaining distance between them finally overpowers his strict adherence to their rules. Leaning down, he places his hand gently on the side of her face and kisses her, breaking the final boundary of their fake dating arrangement. The kiss is slow, deliberate, and deeply passionate, carrying all the unsaid emotion and building tension that has been accumulating between them over the past several weeks. The primary conflict of the chapter emerges immediately after the physical connection breaks, as both characters are suddenly forced to confront the complicated emotional fallout of their actions. Taylor looks up at him, her eyes wide with a mixture of shock, confusion, and profound vulnerability, her breath hitching as she tries to process whether the gesture was merely another highly convincing performance for the watching crowd or a genuine declaration of his feelings. Connor feels a sudden surge of internal panic, not because he regrets the kiss, but because he recognizes that by crossing that line, he has stripped away the safe, uncomplicated shield of their business agreement, leaving his true, possessive feelings completely exposed to the girl he has grown to cherish. The narrative shifts to the quiet ride back to Connor's apartment, the atmosphere inside the vehicle thick with a heavy, charged silence that contrasts sharply with the easy, casual banter they usually share. Neither of them speaks as Connor navigates the dark campus streets, both entirely lost in their own racing thoughts and fears of rejection. Once they arrive at his apartment and step inside the quiet living room, the artificial walls of their arrangement completely collapse. Taylor confronts him directly, asking him to clarify the meaning behind the kiss and demanding to know if they are still just playing a game to fool the university social circles. The chapter reaches its emotional peak as Connor refuses to retreat behind his usual carefree persona or offer a superficial excuse. He steps into her personal space, taking her hands in his to stop her trembling, and speaks with an earnest, uncharacteristic intensity that completely alters the dynamic of their relationship. He confesses that the kiss had nothing to do with the party, her sorority, or his hockey coach, admitting that he has been entirely in love with her for weeks and is completely tired of pretending. The chapter concludes from Connor's viewpoint as he watches the fear and doubt melt away from Taylor's face, replaced by a radiant, genuine smile that confirms she feels exactly the same way, officially ending their web of convenient lies and marking the true, passionate beginning of their real relationship. Chapter 11 returns to Taylor Marsh's perspective, capturing the profound emotional shift that occurs immediately after Connor's honest confession. The narrative opens in the quiet and intimate sanctuary of Connor's living room, where the heavy weight of their shared secrets finally lifts. Taylor feels a massive wave of relief wash over her, a sharp contrast to the constant anxiety she has carried since the night of the initial party dare. Sitting together on the comfortable couch, the air between them feels entirely different, stripped of the performative masks they had worn for the benefit of the campus. For the first time, Taylor allows herself to fully accept that a guy as popular, attractive, and universally admired as Connor could genuinely see her, value her, and want her for exactly who she is. The primary conflict of the chapter explores the transition from a highly calculated public arrangement to an authentic private relationship, which brings a new set of emotional vulnerabilities for Taylor. While she is overjoyed by Connor's affection, her deep-seated insecurities do not disappear overnight. As they talk through the early hours of the morning, she finds herself worrying about how the rest of the university will react when they realize the pairing is real. She fears the inevitable judgment from cruel peers who might still view her as a mismatched partner for the varsity hockey star. Connor detects her lingering hesitation and addresses her doubts with immense tenderness, pulling her into his arms and reassuring her that the opinions of the campus social hierarchy mean absolutely nothing to him compared to what they have built together. The narrative shifts to the following morning as they step out into the campus light as a true couple. They walk hand in hand toward the student union for breakfast, making no effort to hide their closeness or play a part for an audience. Taylor notices that the whispers and glances from passing students are still present, but her internal reaction has completely changed. With Connor's hand firmly grasping hers, the scrutiny no longer feels like a threat to her survival. Instead, it feels like white noise in the background of a life that has become infinitely brighter. They encounter a few of Taylor's sorority sisters near the main entrance, and instead of feeling the old pressure to perform or lie, Taylor simply smiles and moves past them, realizing that her dependence on their superficial approval has completely evaporated. The chapter reaches its emotional peak during a quiet moment at a corner table inside the crowded dining hall. As Connor leans across the table to share his breakfast and makes a ridiculous, teasing comment that sends Taylor into a fit of genuine laughter, she looks at him and realizes how much she has grown since the night she was forced to approach him on a cruel dare. The game that was designed by her enemies to break her spirit has instead broken her chains, forcing her to step out of her comfort zone and discover her own worth. The chapter concludes from Taylor's perspective as she watches Connor sketch out a playful strategy on a paper napkin for his next hockey game, her heart swelling with an overwhelming sense of gratitude and profound happiness, fully ready to face whatever challenges the college year brings next, because she is no longer hiding behind a lie. Chapter 12 shifts back to Connor Edwards' perspective, exploring the internal and external changes he experiences as his relationship with Taylor transitions from a calculated public stunt into a deeply meaningful private reality. The chapter opens during an early morning team practice at the Briar University ice rink, where the atmosphere is intense and fast-paced. Connor is playing with a newfound sense of clarity and focus that does not go unnoticed by his teammates or his coaching staff. On the ice, his movements are sharp, his passes are crisp, and he handles the physical demands of the drills with an easy efficiency. Away from the ice, the casual, non-committal attitude he used to project has been replaced by a grounded stability, a direct result of the peace and security he finds in his genuine connection with Taylor. The primary conflict of the chapter surfaces during a post-practice conversation in the team video room, where Connor and his closest friends on the team are reviewing game footage. His teammates notice that Connor is no longer scanning his phone for the next campus party or checking out the dating profiles of the girls messaging his social media accounts. Instead, he is openly sending sweet, supportive texts to Taylor, checking in on her ahead of a major academic exam she has later that afternoon. The hockey players rib him thoroughly about being completely whipped, but Connor merely smiles and accepts the teasing, realizing that he has absolutely no desire to return to his old, superficial lifestyle. However, the light-hearted mood shifts when a teammate mentions that Connor's father was spotted talking to some athletic boosters near the athletic department, reminding Connor that his family's heavy, unrelenting pressure regarding his future career goals is never far away. The narrative shifts to later that evening when Connor surprises Taylor by picking her up from her library study session to take her out for a celebratory dinner after her difficult exam. Instead of taking her to a crowded campus hangout where they would be subjected to the prying eyes of the student body, Connor chooses a quiet, family-owned Italian restaurant located a few miles away from the university campus. Sitting in a secluded booth under warm, dim lighting, Connor observes how relaxed Taylor looks away from the toxic environment of her sorority house. As they share a meal, they talk deeply about their individual goals, with Connor opening up about the immense weight of his father's expectations and his fear of failing to secure a professional hockey contract, a vulnerability he has never shared with anyone else on campus. The chapter reaches its emotional peak as Taylor listens to his confessions with absolute empathy, reaching across the table to place her hand over his and offering him the kind of unconditional support he has never received from his own family. She tells him that his worth as a person is not entirely defined by his performance on the ice or the approval of his demanding father, validating his feelings in a way that deeply moves him. Connor looks at her, overwhelmed by the realization that the girl who once felt completely invisible is the only person who truly sees him for who he is behind his golden boy athlete persona. The chapter concludes from Connor's viewpoint as he pays the bill and walks Taylor out into the cool night air, his arm wrapped securely around her waist as he accepts that he will do whatever it takes to protect this relationship from the outside pressures of his family and the university social hierarchy. Chapter 13 returns to Taylor Marsh's perspective, opening on a bright Tuesday morning as she prepares for an afternoon of intense classes and an evaluation meeting at the Kappa Chai house. The atmosphere within her bedroom is remarkably peaceful, a stark contrast to the chaotic mental state she occupied only a few weeks prior. As she checks her reflection before leaving, she notices a subtle shift in her own posture and expression. The sharp, defensive edge born of chronic insecurity has begun to soften, replaced by a quiet, grounded confidence. This internal evolution is directly linked to the emotional safety she experiences in her relationship with Connor, whose consistent affection has provided her with a solid foundation from which to view her own worth outside the narrow parameters of campus social validation. The primary conflict of the chapter develops when Taylor arrives at the sorority house for a mandatory chapter meeting focused on the upcoming autumn charity gala. The sorority leadership, still highly aware of Taylor's elevated social status due to her relationship with the star varsity athlete, attempts to manipulate her into using Connor's name to secure premium sponsorships and high-profile attendees for the event. The House president subtly hints that Taylor's continued favor within the executive committee is tied to her willingness to leverage her personal life for the chapter's collective advancement. Taylor faces a difficult internal dilemma, feeling the old, familiar pressure to comply in order to maintain peace, balanced against a fearsome, protective instinct over her genuine relationship with Connor, which she refuses to reduce to a tool for social climbing or organizational leverage. The narrative shifts to later that afternoon when Taylor meets Connor at a quiet coffee shop near the edge of the university campus to study and decompress. As they sit at a corner table away from the main student traffic, Connor immediately senses the lingering tension in her demeanor and gently presses her to share what is bothering her. Taylor reluctantly explains the situation at the sorority house, expressing her deep distaste for how her peers view every human connection as a transaction. Connor listens with an intense, quiet focus, his usual easygoing expression hardening as he witnesses the emotional exhaustion caused by the house dynamics. Instead of offering a simplistic solution, he validates her frustration entirely, emphasizing that she's under no obligation to compromise her personal boundaries to satisfy the shallow demands of her peers. The chapter reaches its emotional peak during this conversation as Connor reinforces his commitment to her independence and personal boundaries. He takes her hand across the table, his thumb tracing reassuring circles over her knuckle, and tells her that her value to him and to the world has absolutely nothing to do with what she can provide or who she can influence. He praises her intelligence, her integrity, and her courage to stand up against the subtle bullying of her social circle, words that resonate deeply within Taylor and dismantle the remaining vestiges of her old insecurities. The chapter concludes from Taylor's perspective as they pack up their study materials and walk out into the golden afternoon light, her heart full of a profound sense of liberation as she realizes that with Connor by her side, she finally possesses the strength to define her life on her own terms, completely free from the toxic expectations of the campus hierarchy. Chapter 14 shifts back to Connor Edwards' perspective, opening on a crisp autumn morning inside the Briar University athletic complex. Connor is attending an early morning film review session with the hockey team's coaching staff, an environment that is traditionally highly critical and demanding. The head coach is breaking down tactical plays from their recent games, pointing out minor positional errors and demanding absolute precision from the players as they prepare for the upcoming mid-season tournament. Connor receives praise for his high-scoring assists and his improved defensive awareness, a validation that highlights his growth as a complete player since transferring to the university. Despite the positive feedback from his coaches, Connor feels a persistent undertone of stress, knowing that the stakes are rising both on the ice and in his personal life. The primary conflict of the chapter intensifies when Connor exits the athletic center and finds his father waiting for him in the parking lot. His father has driven up to the campus unexpectedly, ostensibly to discuss Connor's academic progress, but primarily to pressure him about his athletic future and professional scouting opportunities. Standing in the cool morning air, his father delivers a harsh, critical assessment of Connor's career trajectory, emphasizing that any distraction, including a serious relationship, could compromise his chances of securing a top-tier professional contract after graduation. This confrontation exposes the deep generational rift between them, as his father views Connor's life strictly as a business investment, completely disregarding his emotional well-being or personal happiness. Connor fights to maintain his composure, refusing to let his father's demands dictate his choices or undermine his commitment to Taylor. The narrative shifts to later that afternoon when Connor meets Taylor at their designated meeting spot near the university quad. Connor is visibly drained from the tense encounter with his father, his usual easygoing charm replaced by a quiet, heavy exhaustion. Taylor immediately notices the change in his demeanor and guides him away from the busy campus walkways to a secluded bench near the old campus chapel. As they sit together in the quiet shade, Connor opens up completely about the conversation with his father, admitting how much the relentless pressure and lack of emotional support have weighed on him throughout his collegiate career. It is a moment of profound vulnerability for Connor, who has spent his entire life wearing a carefree mask to hide his deep-seated anxieties from the world. The chapter reaches its emotional peak as Taylor listens to his confessions with absolute empathy, offering him the unconditional acceptance he has never received from his family legacy. She wraps her arms around him, pulling him close and reassuring him that his worth as a person is entirely independent of his athletic achievements or his father's conditional approval. Her fierce defense of his individuality and her unwavering support soothe his inner turmoil, solidifying his realization that she is the most important part of his life at Briar University. The chapter concludes from Connor's viewpoint as he holds Taylor tightly in the quiet courtyard, the heavy burden of his family expectations melting away in her embrace as he resolves to protect their relationship at all costs, fully aware that her love has given him the strength to define his own future on his own terms. Chapter 15 returns to Taylor Marsh's perspective, opening on a quiet rainy evening inside her bedroom at the Kappa Chai house. The soft patter of rain against the window pane matches the reflective mood that has taken hold of her. She's reviewing her academic schedule for the upcoming weeks, realizing that the midterm season is approaching with a heavy workload of essays and research presentations. Despite the academic pressure, her mind continuously wanders back to the profound vulnerability Connor shared with her during their previous meeting. Seeing the campus golden boy dismantle his carefree facade and trust her with his deepest familial anxieties has altered her entire understanding of their connection, cementing a deep sense of mutual emotional responsibility that goes far beyond their initial arrangement. The primary conflict of the chapter surfaces when Taylor receives a sudden manipulative text message from her sorority's social chair, demanding that she provide a finalized guest list of varsity hockey players for the upcoming autumn charity gala by the end of the week. The message carries a subtle, passive-aggressive threat, implying that Taylor's failure to deliver the athletic department's top names will result in her being assigned the most undesirable volunteer shifts during the event. This constant transactional pressure from her peers leaves a bitter taste in her mouth, highlighting the stark contrast between the superficiality of her sorority environment and the authentic unconditional safety she experiences when she's alone with Connor. Taylor resolves to handle the situation without compromising Connor's privacy or forcing him to exploit his teammates for her social convenience. The narrative shifts to later that night when Connor sneaks over to her house, utilizing the back entrance to avoid the prying eyes of the other sorority members who are gathered in the main living room. When he enters her room, the lingering tension in his shoulders from his father's visit is still visible, but his expression instantly softens the moment he looks at her. They bypass their textbooks entirely, choosing instead to create a comfortable sanctuary on her bed surrounded by pillows. Taylor takes this opportunity to address the ongoing pressure from her house, telling him about the social chair's demands but explicitly stating that she has no intention of dragging him or his friends into the sorority's political games. Connor listens with a mixture of admiration and quiet intensity, deeply moved by her fierce loyalty and her desire to protect him from being used as a social trophy. The chapter reaches its emotional peak during this quiet, late-night conversation as Connor refuses to let her carry the burden of her sorority's manipulation alone. He reaches out, pulling her tightly against his chest, and tells her that he is more than happy to attend the gala as her genuine partner. Not because of some administrative mandate or social obligation, but simply because he wants to stand by her side and show the entire university how proud he is to be hers. He emphasizes that they are a team now and that her battles are his battles as well. The chapter concludes from Taylor's perspective as she rests her head against his steady heartbeat in the dim light of her room, the rain pouring outside while she experiences an overwhelming sense of peace, fully realizing that the cruel dare that was meant to alienate her has instead provided her with an unyielding anchor in the middle of the campus storm. Chapter 16 shifts back to Connor Edwards' perspective, opening on the afternoon of a crucial mid-season team meeting inside the Briar University hockey fieldhouse. The head coach is delivering an intense strategy briefing, analyzing the playing style of their upcoming rivals and emphasizing the absolute necessity of maintaining a unified front on and off the ice. Connor listens intently, his dedication to the sport undiminished, but he is also highly conscious of the changes within himself. The superficial, transient distractions that used to occupy his mind during previous semesters have completely dropped away, replaced by a deep, stabilizing commitment to his relationship with Taylor. He notes that his performance on the ice has actually improved because he no longer feels the need to constantly project a false, careless persona to mask his internal pressures. The primary conflict of the chapter intensifies when Connor encounters a few of his senior teammates in the lounge after the strategy session. They're discussing the upcoming autumn charity gala, and one of the players mentions that Taylor's sorority has been aggressively reaching out to secure the team's presence as a marketing draw for the event. Connor immediately steps into the conversation, clarifying that while he will absolutely be attending the gala as Taylor's date, his teammates should feel zero social pressure to participate unless they genuinely want to support the charity. This protective stance surprises some of the older players, but it solidifies Connor's reputation as a leader who refuses to let his personal life or his partner be exploited for Greek life politics, demonstrating his unyielding loyalty to Taylor. The narrative shifts to later that evening when Connor meets Taylor at a quiet park near the edge of the university campus to unwind after a demanding day of training and classes. The autumn air is cool, and the leaves are beginning to change color, creating a peaceful backdrop that contrasts sharply with the high-energy environments they both navigate daily. As they walk along the paved paths, Connor notices that Taylor is still carrying a quiet anxiety about the upcoming gala, fearing that her sorority sisters will find a way to orchestrate a dramatic situation to undermine her new standing. Connor uses his natural charm and steady presence to soothe her worries, reassuring her that they will face the evening together as an unbreakable unit. The chapter reaches its emotional peak during a quiet moment near the park pavilion as the sun begins to set, casting long shadows across the grass. Connor stops walking, turning Taylor to face him and taking both of her hands in his. He looks into her eyes with an uncharacteristic seriousness, telling her that he has never felt this grounded or certain about anyone in his life, and that no amount of sorority manipulation or campus gossip can change how deeply he values her. He promises her that the gala will be a celebration of their genuine connection, completely independent of the superficial expectations of their peers. The chapter concludes from Connor's viewpoint as he pulls her into a warm, protective embrace against the autumn chill, his heart beating with a profound sense of purpose as he commits himself entirely to shielding their love from the outside world. Chapter 17 returns to Taylor Marsh's perspective on the afternoon of the highly anticipated Autumn Charity Gala, a milestone event that has loomed over her social calendar for weeks. The chapter opens inside the frantic, high-energy atmosphere of her bedroom at the Kappa Chai house, which is buried under garment bags. makeup kits, and discarded outfits. Her sorority sisters are running up and down the hallways in a state of high anxiety, preparing for an evening meant to showcase the pinnacle of Greek life status on campus. Taylor experiences a familiar wave of internal pressure as she applies her makeup, but this time, the chronic self-doubt that usually paralyzes her is missing. As she slips into a beautiful, elegant dark emerald gown that accents her figure perfectly, she looks in the mirror and realizes that she no longer sees an invisible outcast trying to hide from the world. She sees a woman who has finally claimed her own space. The primary conflict of the chapter begins to simmer when the sorority president and the social chair drop by her room to inspect her appearance before the arrivals begin. Instead of offering genuine compliments, the girls deliver a series of passive-aggressive remarks disguised as advice, reminding Taylor that the entire house is counting on her to ensure Connor Edwards and his high-profile athlete friends remain at the center of the charity auction. They subtly hint that Taylor's long-term social security within the chapter remains tied to her ability to perform as a perfect hostess for the athletic department's elite. The transactional nature of their attention makes Taylor's stomach churn, but instead of shrinking back into her old habits of compliance, she maintains a calm, polite composure that completely disarms her critics, refusing to let them see her sweat or manipulate her emotions. The narrative shifts to the grand ballroom of the University Convention Center, where the gala is underway under sparkling crystal chandeliers, floral arrangements, and the ambient chatter of wealthy boosters, faculty, and students. Taylor stands near the reception desk, navigating the initial wave of superficial conversations with her peers, her eyes constantly tracking the main entrance. The true emotional shift of the evening occurs when the heavy double doors swing open and Connor enters, looking incredibly striking in a tailored black tuxedo that highlights his broad, athletic frame. The moment his gaze locks onto Taylor across the crowded room, the easygoing, playful expression he usually wears for the campus audience disappears, replaced by an intense, breathless admiration that makes her heart leap against her ribs. Connor crosses the ballroom with purposeful strides, completely ignoring the prominent campus figures and sorority girls who attempt to intercept him along the way. When he reaches Taylor, he takes her hand and raises it to his lips, a grand, respectful gesture that sends an immediate whisper through the watching crowd. Throughout the early portion of the event, Connor remains firmly attached to her side, navigating the charity auction with her hand tucked into his arm and ensuring that every booster, teammate, and sorority member understands that Taylor is his absolute priority. His presence acts as an unyielding shield against the subtle slights of her peers, but more importantly, the genuine warmth in his eyes tells her that his behavior is completely real, stripped of any performative intent. The chapter reaches its emotional peak later in the night when the formal speeches conclude and the music shifts to a slower tempo, drawing couples onto the main dance floor. Connor leads Taylor into the center of the room, pulling her close against his chest as they move to the rhythm of the music. Surrounded by the very people who once sought to humiliate her through a cruel party trick, Taylor rests her head against Connor's shoulder, listening to the steady, reassuring rhythm of his heartbeat. She looks up at him, her eyes bright with a mixture of profound gratitude and deep, authentic love, realizing that the toxic social hierarchy that once dictated her self-worth has lost all its power over her. The chapter concludes from Taylor's perspective as Connor leans down to press a soft, lingering kiss to her temple, whispering how beautiful she is in front of the entire university, cementing the fact that their journey from a desperate dare to an unbreakable partnership is officially complete. Chapter 18 shifts back to Connor Edwards' perspective, capturing the immediate, glowing aftermath of the Autumn Charity Gala and the evolving dynamics within his social circle. The narrative opens on the following Sunday morning in the quiet kitchen of Connor's off-campus apartment, where the sunlight streams through the blinds, casting long shadows across the floor. Connor is making breakfast, feeling a profound sense of inner peace that contrasts sharply with the frantic energy of the hockey season. He reflects on the events of the previous evening, particularly the moment he held Taylor on the crowded dance floor under the gaze of the entire university hierarchy. The realization that he no longer feels the need to protect himself behind a carefree surfer boy persona when he is around her brings a deep sense of liberation, solidifying his understanding that what began as a tactical game has completely transformed his life. The primary conflict of the chapter begins to manifest when Connor arrives at the varsity ice rink for an unscheduled afternoon training session with a few of his teammates. In the locker room, the casual banter among the players shifts from their upcoming game strategy to the notable impression Connor and Taylor made at the gala. While most of his friends expressed genuine respect for how Connor stood by Taylor, a senior player makes a thoughtless, mildly derogatory joke about Connor choosing to settle down with a quiet junior instead of capitalizing on his high-profile athlete status with the flashier social circles on campus. Connor's response is immediate and uncompromising. His easygoing demeanor completely vanishes, replaced by a cold, sharp authority that stuns the locker room into silence as he makes it clear that any disrespect directed toward Taylor will result in a severe personal and professional fracture between them. The narrative shifts to later that afternoon when Connor receives a lengthy text message from his father, who had seen photographs of the charity gala posted on the university's alumni network. The message is characteristically cold and transactional, demanding to know if this serious relationship is going to interfere with Connor's preparation for the mid-season scout showcases that are scheduled to begin in the coming weeks. His father's persistent refusal to view him as anything other than a professional hockey prospect triggers a wave of familiar frustration, but Connor finds that the emotional weight of his father's disapproval no longer carries the same paralyzing power it once did. The unconditional support he has received from Taylor has given him a new foundation of self-worth, allowing him to view his athletic career as his own journey rather than a mandatory fulfillment of a family legacy. The chapter reaches its emotional peak when Connor drives over to Taylor's house to surprise her with a late-night study break, wanting nothing more than to escape the lingering tension of his family obligations. They park near a secluded overlook at the edge of the campus grounds where the lights of the university twinkle in the distance under a clear, starlit sky. Sitting together in the warmth of the vehicle, Connor opens up to her about the locker room confrontation and his father's message, exposing the raw vulnerability he usually hides from the world. Instead of offering hollow platitudes, Taylor listens with intense empathy, turning in her seat to look him directly in the eyes and reminding him that his strength as a leader and his value as a man are defined by his integrity and his kindness, not by the approval of a scout or the rigid expectations of his father. Connor looks at her in the dim light of the dashboard, overwhelmed by the depth of her understanding and the realization that she's the only person who has ever truly seen him without demanding perfection in return. The chapter concludes from Connor's viewpoint as he pulls her close, resting his forehead against hers in the quiet darkness, his heart beating with an absolute, unshakable certainty that no matter what pressures the upcoming tournament or his family legacy bring, he will protect this relationship with everything he has because Taylor has become his true home. Chapter 19 returns to Taylor Marsh's perspective, opening on a chilly, late autumn morning inside the university library. The atmosphere is quiet and studious, filled with the faint rustle of turning pages and the low hum of laptops, which provides a welcome relief from the constant social chatter of her sorority house. Taylor is deeply focused on completing a complex research methodology paper for her psychology major, a task that requires her full intellectual engagement. As she works through the data analysis, she's pleasantly surprised to find that her mind feels clearer and more focused than it has in previous semesters. The constant draining background noise of her social anxieties has been completely replaced by a quiet sense of purpose, a direct benefit of the emotional stability she has found in her partnership with Connor. The primary conflict of the chapter begins to take shape when Taylor takes a brief coffee break in the library lounge and runs into an old acquaintance from her freshman year who is not part of the elite Greek life circles. The friend notes with genuine admiration how much more relaxed and genuinely happy Taylor seems lately, contrasting her current grounded demeanor with the visible tension and desperate compliance she used to project when she was first trying to fit in at the Kappa Chai house. This conversation acts as an eye-opening moment for Taylor, forcing her to realize that her past efforts to mold herself into what she thought her peers wanted were not only exhausting but entirely transparent to the people who truly knew her, highlighting the immense personal growth she has achieved over the past few months. The narrative shifts to later that afternoon when Taylor returns to the sorority house to pick up some textbooks and finds a group of younger pledges gathered in the dining room, looking visibly stressed and overwhelmed by the rigid social expectations imposed by the senior executive committee. Seeing her own past vulnerabilities mirrored in the anxious expressions of the freshman pledges, Taylor decides to take action, rather than ignoring them to maintain her own comfortable position near the top of the house hierarchy. She sits down with the younger girls and offers them genuine, practical advice on navigating the intense academic and social pressures of their first year, deliberately undermining the culture of intimidation that her former tormentors used to maintain. The chapter reaches its emotional peak during this impromptu mentoring session, as the genuine gratitude and visible relief on the faces of the pledges confirm to Taylor that she is completely broken free from the toxic cycle of her environment. She realizes that the power she holds on campus is no longer a shallow byproduct of dating a popular athlete. It is an authentic authority rooted in her own empathy, intelligence, and willingness to protect others from the same cruelty she once faced. The chapter concludes from Taylor's perspective as she leaves the house to meet Connor for dinner, walking down the front steps with a deep, unshakable sense of self-respect, fully aware that she no longer needs a fake arrangement or the approval of a shallow sisterhood to know exactly who she is and what she's worth. Chapter 20 shifts back to Connor Edwards' perspective, opening on the momentous morning of the mid-season Scout Showcase tournament at the Briar University Varsity Arena. The entire athletic complex is buzzing with intense energy, the stands packed with student supporters, alumni, and rows of professional hockey talent scouts holding clipboards and radar guns. Connor stands in the locker room, listening to the final, fiery briefing from his head coach. He can feel the immense gravity of the situation. This tournament represents the absolute peak of his collegiate career so far and the primary opportunity to secure his dream of a professional contract. Despite the high-stakes pressure radiating through the room, Connor finds himself completely calm, his mind anchored by the knowledge that his worth is no longer tied solely to the scoreboard. The primary conflict of the chapter intensifies during the grueling, fast-paced championship match against their fiercest division rivals. The game is highly physical, with both teams trading brutal hits and quick goals. Throughout the first two periods, Connor plays with a brilliant, calculated intensity, delivering 2 spectacular assists that keep Briar tied with their opponents. However, during the final minutes of the game, Connor spots his father sitting in the executive box next to a prominent NHL scout, his arms crossed and a characteristically stern expression on his face. For a fleeting second, the old, paralyzing anxiety threatens to creep back into Connor's chest, but he catches sight of Taylor sitting directly behind the team bench, wearing his jersey and cheering with unshakable pride. The contrast instantly clears his mind, erasing his father's suffocating expectations and leaving only his pure passion for the sport. The narrative shifts to the final, breathless play of the match with only 30 seconds remaining on the clock. Accepting a risky, blind pass from his defenseman, Connor drives hard toward the opponent's net, skillfully weaving through 2 towering defenders. With an explosive, definitive strike, he sends the puck flying past the goalie's glove hand, scoring the game-winning goal just as the final buzzer sounds. The arena erupts into absolute chaos, the crowd roaring as his teammates mob him on the ice in a wild celebration. After shaking hands with the opposing team and accepting the tournament trophy, Connor bypasses the waiting huddle of sports reporters and boosters, his eyes fixed entirely on the exit gates where the families and partners gather. The chapter reaches its emotional peak in the quiet, concrete hallway just outside the locker room doors, away from the flashing cameras and shouting fans. Taylor is waiting for him there, her eyes bright with immense joy and relief. Connor doesn't say a word. He simply drops his heavy gear bag and pulls her into fierce, lifting embrace, burying his face in her shoulder as the remaining tension of his collegiate career completely melts away. He realizes that winning the game means nothing compared to the profound peace of having her by his side. The chapter concludes from Connor's viewpoint as he takes her hand, ready to finally confront his father and the waiting scouts with absolute confidence, fully aware that no matter where his professional hockey journey takes him next, he has already won the greatest prize Briar University had to offer. Chapter 21 returns to Taylor Marsh's perspective, opening on the evening of graduation day at Briar University. The campus is bathed in the warm, golden light of a late spring sunset, the lawns crowded with families, faculty, and students dressed in caps and gowns. Taylor stands on the steps of the main auditorium, holding her psychology diploma in her hands. Looking out over the bustling crowd, she reflects on the incredible trajectory of her college career. The girl who had once walked these same paths feeling completely invisible, suffocated by the cruel expectations of her sorority, has vanished entirely. In her place is a confident, grounded woman who graduated at the top of her class, completely secure in her own identity and worth. The primary conflict of the chapter centers on the bittersweet reality of endings and new beginnings. While graduation represents a massive personal triumph for Taylor, it also brings the looming uncertainty of the future. Connor has officially signed his professional contract with an NHL affiliate team based in Chicago, and Taylor has been accepted into a prestigious graduate program in the same city. Although their futures are aligned, the transition from the familiar insular world of college into the high-stakes reality of adulthood brings a natural wave of underlying anxiety. Taylor watches her former sorority sisters taking superficial group photos nearby, realizing she feels absolutely no malice or envy toward them anymore, only a profound sense of gratitude for the journey that forced her to step out of her comfort zone. The narrative shifts away from the crowded ceremony as Taylor and Connor slip away from the graduation parties, seeking the quiet sanctuary of the university lake where their relationship first began to shift from a fake arrangement into a genuine connection. The evening air is cool and peaceful, the distant sounds of celebration fading into the background. Connor has shed his formal graduation gown, wearing a simple shirt that makes him look less like the campus sports hero and more like the man who has become Taylor's entire world. They sit together on their favorite wooden bench, watching the ripples on the water reflect the first evening stars. The chapter reaches its emotional peak as Connor turns to Taylor, his expressive eyes filled with an intense, unwavering devotion. He takes her hands in his, noting how perfectly they fit together, and speaks with a deep seriousness that mirrors the night he first confessed his love to her in his apartment. He tells her that while the campus will remember him for the goals he scored and the games he won, his greatest achievement at Briar University will always be winning her heart. He promises her that no matter how demanding his professional career becomes or how challenging the transition to a new city might be, his commitment to her is permanent and absolute. Taylor looks at him, her heart overflowing with a profound joyous certainty. The cruel dare that was orchestrated by her peers to break her spirit had instead led her straight to the safest, most authentic love she had ever known. The story concludes from Taylor's perspective as Connor leans down to press a deep, lingering kiss to her lips, their futures stretching out before them like an open road, fully prepared to face the world together as an unbreakable team. Chapter 22 shifts back to Connor Edwards' perspective, opening a few weeks after graduation as the reality of their new life in Chicago begins to take shape. The narrative finds Connor standing inside the bright, high-rise apartment he and Taylor have chosen to share, surrounded by a mountain of half-unpacked cardboard boxes, taped-up clothing racks, and scattered home decor. The view outside the floor-to-ceiling windows features the iconic Chicago skyline rather than the familiar red brick buildings of Briar University. As Connor carries a heavy crate of books into the living room, he experiences a profound sense of accomplishment, realizing that stepping into this new territory feels entirely different from his past transitions, primarily because he is no longer navigating his milestones alone. The primary conflict of the chapter explores the immediate adjustments required by their sudden leap into adulthood and professional expectations. Later that afternoon, Connor has to leave the apartment to attend his first official media orientation and medical screening at the professional franchise's downtown training facility. Walking into the sleek, high-tech complex, he is instantly reminded of the massive scale of the professional league. The easygoing big man on campus status he enjoyed at Briar means absolutely nothing here, where he is once again a rookie who must prove his dedication, speed, and endurance to completely new coaching staff and a roster of seasoned veterans. The pressure is intense, but Connor handles the grueling physical evaluations with a quiet, focused determination, refusing to let the shifting environment shake the grounded confidence he works so hard to build. The narrative shifts back to the apartment early that evening as Connor returns home, his muscles aching from the intense physical testing, but his mind entirely eager to reconnect with Taylor. He finds her sitting on the living room floor, surrounded by heavy textbooks and introductory syllabi for her clinical psychology graduate program, which is scheduled to begin the following week. The sight of her completely resets his energy, instantly melting away the lingering intimidation of the professional locker room. They decide to abandon the remaining moving boxes for the night, ordering food from a local neighborhood spot and setting up a makeshift picnic right on the living room rug. The chapter reaches its emotional peak during this quiet domestic evening as they talk through their first real day in the new city. Connor pulls Taylor into his lap, resting his chin on her shoulder as they look out at the city lights beginning to twinkle across Lake Michigan. He admits to her how surreal it feels to be in a massive new place, facing the biggest challenge of his career, yet feeling completely anchored and at peace because she's there sharing the space with him. Taylor turns to look at him, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw as she reminds him that they have already conquered a campus hierarchy that tried to pull them apart, and that facing a new city as equal partners is a privilege they earn together. The novel reaches its definitive conclusion from Connor's viewpoint as he holds her tightly against his chest, listening to the hum of the city below. He reflects on the incredible journey that began with a malicious, manipulative party dare in a crowded college basement. A trick designed to expose and humiliate a quiet girl, but which instead brought him the only person who truly understood his heart. Looking down at Taylor's radiant, confident smile, Connor knows with absolute certainty that the game is permanently over, and their real life together has finally and beautifully begun. Chapter 23 returns to Taylor Marsh's perspective, capturing the high-energy, fast-paced reality of her first official week as a graduate student in clinical psychology. The campus of her new university is a sharp contrast to Briar. Instead of the familiar cloistered layout of her undergraduate years, this urban campus is completely woven into the fabric of downtown Chicago, filled with towering stone buildings and a diverse, career-driven student body. Taylor stands in the bustling courtyard outside the main lecture hall, holding a heavy stack of case studies and clinical syllabi. For the first time in her academic life, she feels a surge of genuine excitement rather than paralyzing imposter syndrome. The intense self-doubt that used to dictate her actions on Greek Row has been replaced by a fierce, quiet determination to prove herself in a field she truly cares about. The primary conflict of the chapter develops during an introductory seminar on advanced therapeutic frameworks. The professor, a notoriously strict clinical psychologist, announces that the first-year cohort will be immediately assigned to small peer review groups tasked with analyzing complex psychological profiles under tight deadlines. Taylor finds herself partnered with two highly ambitious, competitive students who have extensive research backgrounds from Ivy League institutions. Sensing their subtle condescension and their assumption that she might not keep up, Taylor experiences a fleeting moment of old anxiety. However, instead of shrinking back or resorting to people-pleasing tactics to gain their approval, she firmly establishes her position during their first group discussion, using her sharp analytical skills to point out a critical flaw in their initial diagnosis and earning their immediate, quiet respect. The narrative shifts to later that night when Taylor returns to the apartment, her mind buzzing with the intense intellectual demands of her classes. The living room is mostly unpacked now, feeling much more like a shared home, with a few of Connor's old hockey jerseys neatly framed on the wall next to her favorite art prints. Connor is already home from his team's evening strategy session, sitting at the kitchen island with a massive ice pack strapped to his left shoulder. Seeing the physical toll his new professional training is taking on him, Taylor immediately drops her bag and shifts into a supportive partner role, helping him adjust the ice and pouring him a fresh glass of water. The chapter reaches its emotional peak during this quiet domestic evening as they sit together on the couch, navigating the sheer exhaustion of their parallel journeys. Connor pulls her close against his good shoulder, admitting that the speed and brutality of the professional players during the morning scrimmages were completely off the charts compared to college hockey, making him realize just how hard he will have to fight to keep his spot on the roster. Taylor listens with absolute empathy, running her fingers through his hair and reminding him of the resilience he showed when facing his father's suffocating expectations back at Briar. Her unwavering belief in his talent acts as an immediate balm for his bruised confidence, grounding him in the middle of his new professional storm. The chapter concludes from Taylor's perspective as they turn off the apartment lights and look out at the glowing Chicago skyline, her heart full of a profound sense of unity as she realizes that while their individual worlds have grown infinitely larger and more demanding, their partnership remains an unshakable anchor that can withstand any amount of external pressure. Chapter 24 shifts back to Connor Edwards' perspective, picking up on a bitterly cold Chicago morning as the professional hockey preseason officially gets underway. The narrative opens inside the franchise's state-of-the-art practice facility, where the air smells of fresh ice and industrial skate sharpener. Connor is on the ice early, pushing himself through extra skating drills before the official team practice begins. He can feel the physical stakes rising daily. His body is constantly sore, and the sheer velocity of the game at this level demands split-second decision-making. Despite the grueling physical toll, Connor feels a deep sense of pride. He's no longer playing to satisfy his father's rigid blueprint or to maintain a superficial campus reputation. He's playing for his own future and for the life he's building with Taylor. The primary conflict of the chapter intensifies during a high-intensity scrimmage session when Connor is matched up against a veteran defenseman known for his aggressive, intimidating style on the ice. The veteran deliberately targets Connor, delivering a brutal, borderline illegal check into the boards to test the rookie's psychological resilience. In the past, Connor might have deflected the tension with a careless smile or let his frustration boil over into a penalty. Instead, he maintains absolute emotional control. On the very next play, Connor uses his superior speed to outmaneuver the veteran, executing a flawless, deceptive pass that sets up a teammate for a spectacular goal. The head coach barks out approval from the bench, a crucial moment that proves Connor can handle the psychological warfare of the professional league. The narrative shifts to the locker room after practice, where the atmosphere begins to change for Connor. Winning the respect of the veterans on the ice translates to a more welcoming environment off it. The team captain invites Connor to join a group of players for lunch at a local sports lounge, a significant step toward integration into the team culture. During the lunch, Connor finds himself navigating a different kind of social dynamic, one centered on professional dedication, family responsibilities, and long-term career stability, which contrasts sharply with the toxic, status-driven gossip of his old college fraternity circles. He realizes he fits into this mature environment perfectly, a direct result of the emotional growth he experienced during his final year at Briar. The chapter reaches its emotional peak late that evening when Connor returns to the high-rise apartment. Taylor is buried under a mountain of flashcards, preparing for her first major clinical assessment. Seeing her intensity, Connor doesn't interrupt. Instead, he quietly takes over the kitchen, preparing a healthy dinner and setting up a quiet workspace for her. When she finally takes a break, exhausted and worried about her performance, Connor pulls her into a tight, reassuring embrace. He shares his triumph over the veteran defenseman, explaining how her steady presence in his life has given him the mental toughness to stand his ground. The chapter concludes from Connor's viewpoint as they sit together by the window, watching the traffic crawl along Michigan Avenue, his heart full of an absolute certainty that their mutual support is the ultimate key to conquering their respective high-stakes worlds. Chapter 25 returns to Taylor Marsh's perspective, opening on a gray afternoon as a heavy autumn rainstorm sweeps across Chicago. The weather forces her to spend the day indoors, studying at a quiet corner table near the tall windows of a local library. She's completely absorbed in analyzing a set of complex clinical case studies, a task that requires her to balance theoretical knowledge with genuine human empathy. As she takes notes, she realizes how much her academic approach has transformed since her undergraduate days. She no longer studies out of a desperate fear of failure or a need to prove her intelligence to judgmental peers. Instead, she's driven by a deep, authentic desire to understand the human mind so she can help others heal from their own invisible battles. The primary conflict of the chapter surfaces when Taylor receives an unexpected email from an old acquaintance from her former sorority back at Briar University. The message is filled with superficial updates about the upcoming campus homecoming events, but it quickly shifts to a passive-aggressive inquiry about Taylor's current life in the city, subtly questioning whether she is truly pursuing her own career or simply following her professional athlete partner around. Reading the words, Taylor feels a brief, familiar sting of anger, realizing how easily her past social circle continues to reduce human relationships to calculated competition for status. However, instead of letting the message trigger her old insecurities or spending hours crafting a defensive reply, Taylor simply closes the laptop tab, recognizing that the shallow opinions of her past environment no longer hold any power over her present reality. The narrative shifts to later that evening when Connor arrives back at the apartment after an intensive, multi-hour team tactical meeting. He is physically exhausted, his hair damp from the rain, and his athletic bag dropping heavily onto the entryway floor. Taylor immediately notices the quiet tension in his posture and closes her textbooks, guiding him toward the kitchen island where she has prepared a warm meal. As they eat together, Connor opens up about the escalating pressure at the training facility, explaining that the coaching staff has begun finalizing the starting lineup for the first official game of the regular season, causing an intense, competitive friction among the rookie players in the locker room. The chapter reaches its emotional peak during this candid conversation as they sit together on the living room sofa, the city lights reflecting off the wet pavement outside. Connor rests his head in Taylor's lap, admitting that the constant pressure to perform under a microscope sometimes makes him feel like he's back under his father's suffocating expectations. Taylor runs her fingers through his hair, offering him a calm, unconditional reassurance that strips away his anxiety. She reminds him that his spot on the team is a result of his own immense talent and hard work, not a family obligation, and that their apartment is a safe sanctuary where he never has to perform or prove his worth. The chapter concludes from Taylor's perspective as Connor pulls her close, his breathing slowing down as he finds peace in her embrace, leaving them both feeling completely unified and ready to face the high-stakes challenges of the coming week together. Chapter 26 shifts back to Connor Edwards' perspective, opening on the momentous morning of the first official game of the professional hockey regular season. The atmosphere inside the packed downtown Chicago arena is completely electric, filled with the roar of thousands of passionate fans, flashing stadium lights, and the heavy bass of the entrance music vibrating through the concrete floor. Standing in the tunnel with his teammates, Connor looks out at the pristine sheet of ice, feeling a massive surge of adrenaline. The transition from collegiate sports to the professional league is finally fully realized in this moment. He checks the stands and spots Taylor sitting in the lower bowl, wearing his new team jersey and offering him a confident, reassuring nod that instantly grounds his racing thoughts. The primary conflict of the chapter unfolds during the intense, highly physical second period of the game, with the score tied and the pressure mounting. Connor takes a hard pass near the blue line and drives toward the net, but an opposing veteran defenseman delivers a brutal, calculated slash to his wrist that the referees miss. The sharp pain causes Connor to lose control of the puck, turning it over and leading to a breakaway goal for the rival team. Frustrated and hurting, Connor returns to the bench, his mind briefly spinning into a dark place as he fears this critical mistake will land him on the scratch list for the next game. However, instead of letting the negative spiral take over, he looks back up at Taylor and remembers the resilience they have practiced together, forcing himself to channel his frustration into pure, focused determination for his next shift. The narrative shifts to the final minutes of the third period, with Connor's team down by a single goal. The coach shows immense trust by putting the rookie line back on the ice for a critical power play. Connor plays with absolute precision, ignoring the throbbing pain in his wrist as he positions himself perfectly in front of the opponent's crease. When the puck rebounds off the goalie's pads, Connor reacts with lightning speed, lifting it over the defenseman's stick and straight into the upper corner of the net to score his first official professional goal, tying the game and sending the arena into absolute chaos. Although his team ultimately loses the match in a tense overtime shootout, Connor's spectacular performance cements his place as a legitimate, reliable asset to the franchise. The chapter reaches its emotional peak in the quiet, sterile medical room after the game, where the team doctor is wrapping Connor's badly bruised wrist in ice. The initial high of the goal has faded, leaving him exhausted and feeling the heavy physical toll of the professional lifestyle. The door opens and Taylor is let inside by the security staff, her eyes filled with a mixture of intense pride and deep concern as she rushes to his side. Connor looks up at her, a tired but genuinely happy smile breaking across his face as he realizes that the outcome of the game, or the physical pain, doesn't diminish the incredible life they're building. The chapter concludes from Connor's viewpoint as Taylor gently rests her hand over his good one, promising to take care of him back at the apartment, leaving him with an unshakable sense of peace as he accepts that he no longer has to carry the burden of performance all by himself. Chapter 27 returns to Taylor Marsh's perspective, opening on a crisp, clear winter morning as a blanket of fresh snow covers the Chicago streets. The view from the high-rise apartment is peaceful, but inside Taylor is navigating a high-stakes turning point in her graduate program. She has been selected to begin her first practical clinical rotation at a community mental health clinic downtown, an opportunity that transitions her from theoretical textbooks to face-to-face patient interactions. Standing in front of the mirror as she puts on her professional attire, she feels a familiar flutter of nervousness, but it is entirely different from the toxic anxiety she used to experience at Briar University. This nervousness is rooted in a deep sense of responsibility for the people she's about to help, rather than a fear of social judgment. The primary conflict of the chapter unfolds during her first afternoon at the clinic, where she is assigned to observe and assist with the support group for young adults struggling with severe social anxiety and isolation. As she listens to a young woman describe the paralyzing fear of being judged by her peers and the desperate desire to hide from the world, Taylor feels a profound, visceral wave of empathy. The girl's words mirror Taylor's own past vulnerabilities so perfectly that for a fleeting moment she fears she might lose her professional composure. However, drawing strength from her own journey of healing and the unconditional security she has found in her life with Connor, Taylor manages to channel her personal history into a source of professional strength, offering a deeply insightful perspective during the post-session debrief that earns the high praise of her clinical supervisor. The narrative shifts to later that evening when Taylor returns home, emotionally drained but deeply fulfilled by her work. She finds Connor waiting for her, having returned early from a brief team road trip. Because of his wrist injury from the previous week, the coaching staff has mandated a few days of rest, meaning he isn't skating but is instead focused on physical therapy. The apartment is warm and inviting, a perfect sanctuary from the freezing city winds outside. Connor has ordered food from their favorite local spot and has already set up a relaxing environment, recognizing that Taylor's first day on the clinic floor would take a massive emotional toll on her. The chapter reaches its emotional peak as they sit together on the living room rug, wrapped in a heavy blanket. Taylor opens up about her experience at the clinic, admitting how overwhelming it was to see her past insecurities reflected in the patients and how grateful she is to have broken free from that mental prison. Connor listens with absolute devotion, pulling her tightly against his chest and reminding her that her capacity for deep empathy is exactly what will make her an incredible therapist. He emphasizes that the very pain her college peers tried to use to break her has become the tool she's using to heal others. The chapter concludes from Taylor's perspective as she rests her head against his shoulder, watching the snow fall gently over Lake Michigan, her heart overflowing with a profound sense of purpose and a deep, unshakable gratitude for the life and love they are building together as equals. Chapter 28 shifts back to Connor Edwards' perspective, opening on a tense afternoon inside the team management offices at the Chicago arena. Connor has been called into a private meeting with the general manager and the head coach, an environment that feels heavily corporate and high stakes compared to the athletic offices back at Briar. The management staff sits across a sleek conference table, reviewing his performance data and video clips from the first quarter of the regular season. While they praise his exceptional court vision and his game-tying goal, they also explicitly outline the brutal realities of the professional league, warning him that several injured veteran players are returning to the active roster next week, meaning competition for his starting spot on the rookie line will become fiercely intense. The primary conflict of the chapter deepens when Connor exits the arena and finds his father waiting for him inside a parked luxury sedan across the street. His father has flown into Chicago unexpectedly under the guise of attending an upcoming weekend home game, but his true agenda immediately surfaces during the tense drive downtown. He delivers a harsh analytical critique of Connor's recent game tape, focusing entirely on the minor turnover that led to the opponent's breakaway goal in Chapter 26. His father aggressively asserts that Connor's dedication is wavering and explicitly blames his domestic living arrangement with Taylor, claiming that sharing an apartment and carrying the emotional weight of a serious relationship is a massive distraction that will cost him his professional career. The narrative shifts to later that evening at a quiet upscale restaurant where his father insists on hosting a dinner, forcing Taylor to join them. The atmosphere at the table is thick with a heavy, suffocating tension as Connor's father controls the conversation, dropping passive-aggressive remarks about the academic demands of Taylor's graduate program and subtly questioning whether she has the time to properly support a professional athlete's rigorous lifestyle. Connor feels a familiar surge of internal fury, but instead of retreating into his old habit of careless deflection, he takes Taylor's hand firmly above the table, looking his father directly in the eye and calmly but resolutely stating that Taylor is his absolute priority and the primary source of his stability, refusing to let his father's manipulation compromise their unity. The chapter reaches its emotional peak back at their high-rise apartment after his father finally leaves for his hotel. The artificial restraint Connor maintained during dinner completely collapses, leaving him pacing the living room floor in a state of raw, vulnerable exhaustion. Taylor steps into his space, gently stopping his pacing and pulling him down onto the sofa beside her. Instead of feeling hurt by his father's coldness, she offers Connor a fierce, unconditional defense, validating his anger and reminding him that his father no longer holds the keys to his future or his self-worth. The chapter concludes from Connor's viewpoint as he holds her tightly in the quiet darkness of their home, the heavy burden of his family legacy finally melting away as he realizes that his father's attempts to divide them have only solidified his resolve to protect Taylor and their shared life above all else. Chapter 29 returns to Taylor Marsh's perspective, opening on a freezing December morning as the first major winter blizzard hit Chicago, burying the city streets under heavy drifts of snow and keeping the local population indoors. Inside the apartment, Taylor is wrapped in a thick wool cardigan, sitting by the floor-to-ceiling windows with a steaming mug of tea as she watches the snow swirl violently against the glass. The physical isolation brought by the storm mirrors the reflective, protective mood that has settled over her since the tense dinner with Connor's father. Looking at Connor, who is asleep on the couch with a physical therapy brace tightly secured around his healing wrist, she feels a profound wave of protective instinct. The confrontation with his family has changed something fundamental within her. She's no longer the vulnerable girl who needs a shield, but a fierce partner fully prepared to act as an unyielding anchor for the man she loves. The primary conflict of the chapter begins to take shape later that afternoon when Taylor receives a sudden, formal phone call from a private number. The caller identifies himself as an executive assistant working directly for Connor's father's sports management agency. Speaking in a clipped, clinical, and transactional tone, the assistant subtly attempts to intimidate Taylor, offering to help her secure an elite, fully funded clinical internship at a prestigious medical research foundation back in New England for her second year of graduate school. While presented as a generous professional advancement opportunity, the underlying subtext is dangerously clear. Connor's family is attempting to use their massive corporate influence to quietly bribe and maneuver Taylor out of Chicago, effectively ending her cohabitation with Connor under the guise of career development. The narrative reaches a critical turning point as Taylor listens to the corporate pitch without letting her voice tremble or her composure slip. A year ago, an interaction with a figure of such immense social and financial authority would have caused her to shrink back into compliance or doubt her own worth. Instead, drawing upon her psychological training and her absolute security in her relationship, Taylor recognizes the offer as a desperate manipulative tactic designed to exploit her ambition. She calmly, politely, but completely declines the assistant's offer, explicitly stating that her academic and personal future is firmly established in Chicago, and that any future communication regarding her career or her living arrangements should be directed to her alone, completely neutralizing the ambush. The narrative shifts to the evening as the blizzard outside continues to rage, casting a quiet, insular atmosphere over the high-rise building. When Connor wakes up, his muscles stiff from his rehabilitation exercises, Taylor decides to be entirely transparent with him about the phone call, refusing to let his father's underhanded tactics create a wedge of secrecy between them. She sits beside him on the sofa, holding his good hand as she calmly details the assistant's offer and her definitive rejection. Connor listens with a mixture of dark, simmering fury at his family's boundary crossing and an intense, breathless admiration for Taylor's unyielding loyalty and strength. The fact that she handled the corporate intimidation with such absolute grace and authority fills him with a deep sense of reverence. The chapter reaches its emotional peak during this quiet, late-night conversation as Connor pulls her onto his lap, burying his face in the crook of her neck as the remaining tension from his family obligations finally shatters. He tells her that he has spent his entire life watching people capitulate to his father's financial power and corporate manipulation, and that seeing her stand like an unbreakable wall against that pressure makes him feel safer than he ever thought possible. He promises her, his voice thick with a profound, quiet intensity, that he will officially address his father's interference at the upcoming weekend game, ensuring that a permanent boundary is established to protect their shared life. The chapter concludes from Taylor's perspective as they remain curled together in the dim light of the living room, the storm howling violently against the skyscraper windows while inside their sanctuary. They experience a complete, unshakable peace, fully aware that their partnership has grown far too strong to be broken by external manipulation. Chapter 30 shifts back to Connor Edwards' perspective, picking up on the Saturday afternoon of the heavily anticipated weekend home game. The atmosphere inside the professional arena is intensely focused, with team staff, media crews, and thousands of fans streaming through the concourses. In the locker room, Connor is getting dressed, carefully taping his left wrist over the physical therapy wrap. His mind is a steel trap. The anger from learning about his father's underhanded attempt to bribe Taylor out of the city has completely hardened his resolve. He feels zero anxiety about his performance or his starting spot on the roster. Instead, he feels a cold, calculated clarity, ready to channel every ounce of his frustration directly into the match. The primary conflict of the chapter explodes on the ice during a brutal, fast-paced game against a physical division rival. The opposing team plays a highly aggressive defensive game, deliberately trying to rattle the rookie line. Connor, however, is completely untouchable. He plays with a fierce, punishing speed, executing brilliant tactical plays and delivering a spectacular assist in the first period. Late in the third period, with the game tied, Connor reads a defensive breakdown, intercepts a blind pass at mid-ice and drives hard toward the goal. With a definitive, powerful strike, he scores the game-winning point, sending the stadium into absolute chaos and securing a massive victory for the franchise. The narrative shifts immediately to the high-stakes confrontation after the game. Bypassing the celebration in the locker room, Connor remains in his gear and walks straight into the arena's private executive lounge where his father is waiting for him alongside a group of corporate sponsors. Ignoring the boosters entirely, Connor demands that his father step into the hallway for a private conversation. Standing under the harsh corridor lights, Connor confronts him with an absolute, chilling authority that his father has never seen before. He explicitly states that he knows about the fraudulent internship offer made to Taylor and declares that any further interference in their personal life, their apartment, or Taylor's career will result in Connor completely severing all personal and professional ties with him permanently, effectively cutting his father out of his life and his future hockey contracts. His father is visibly stunned by Connor's unyielding stance, realizing for the very first time that his financial power and corporate manipulation no longer carry any leverage over his son. Connor doesn't wait for a defensive reply. He simply turns his back on his family legacy and walks away, feeling an immense liberating weight lift from his shoulders. He returns to the locker room area to quickly shower and change into his civilian clothes, eager to leave the corporate arena environment behind. The chapter reaches its emotional peak in the concrete underground parking garage where Taylor is waiting for him beside his vehicle. The moment Connor sees her standing there in the cool winter air, the residual tension from the confrontation completely evaporates. He walks up to her, wraps his arms tightly around her waist and lifts her slightly off the ground, burying his face in her hair as he lets out a long, definitive breath. He whispers that it is finally over, letting her know that the boundaries have been permanently set and that his father will never touch their relationship again. The chapter concludes from Connor's viewpoint as they get into the car and drive away from the stadium lights, his heart beating with a profound, unshakable peace, fully aware that by choosing to protect Taylor, he has finally claimed his absolute freedom as a man. Chapter 31 returns to Taylor Marsh's perspective, opening on a quiet Sunday morning as the golden winter sunlight streams through the frost-rimmed windows of the Chicago apartment. The atmosphere inside their home is remarkably peaceful, marking the first day in weeks where neither the intense pressures of the professional hockey season nor the manipulative shadow of Connor's family looms over them. Taylor is sitting at the kitchen island, nursing a warm cup of coffee and looking over her upcoming clinical seminar schedule. As she watches Connor carefully remove his physical therapy wrist brace, she notices a profound shift in his demeanor. The rigid, defensive posture he had carried since his father's arrival in the city has completely vanished, replaced by a relaxed, genuine calm that she hasn't seen since their final days at Briar University. The primary conflict of the chapter is internal and reflective, focusing on the emotional aftermath of the heavy boundaries they established in the previous chapters. As they eat a quiet breakfast together, Connor opens up about the absolute finality of his confrontation with his father in the arena corridor. He admits that while cutting off his father's corporate interference brings an immense sense of liberation, it also brings a strange, quiet grief for the supportive family dynamic he never truly had. Taylor uses her clinical training and her deep empathy to comfort him, helping him navigate the complex emotions of mourning a relationship that was always transactional. She reassures him that blood does not dictate his future and that the chosen family they are building in this new city is entirely real, healthy, and unconditional. The narrative shifts to later that afternoon when Taylor receives an unexpected text message from her graduate program advisor. The advisor informs her that her exceptional performance and insightful contributions during her initial clinical rotation at the community mental health clinic have earned her an invitation to co-present a research abstract at a prestigious regional psychology conference in Chicago early next spring. This massive academic milestone is a direct validation of her talent and dedication, completely independent of any Greek life status or corporate connections. Overwhelmed with joy, Taylor shares the news with Connor, who immediately celebrates her success with infectious enthusiasm, picking her up and spinning her around the living room, proving once again how deeply invested he is in her personal and professional growth. The chapter reaches its emotional peak as the winter dusk settles over Lake Michigan, casting a soft purple hue across the city skyline. Connor surprises Taylor by setting up a small celebratory dinner right in their apartment, complete with her favorite takeout and a handwritten card expressing how incredibly proud he is to stand by her side as she conquers her academic goals. Sitting together on the sofa in the warm glow of the living room lamps, Taylor rests her head against his chest, listening to the steady, reassuring rhythm of his heartbeat. She reflects on how far they have traveled from the malicious college party dare that first threw them together. The toxic peers who once sought to humiliate her have faded into complete irrelevance, replaced by a brilliant, high-stakes future that they are conquering side by side. The chapter concludes from Taylor's perspective as Connor presses a tender kiss to her forehead, leaving her with an unshakable sense of security and absolute peace as they prepare to step into the next chapter of their lives as true equals. Chapter 32 shifts back to Connor Edwards' perspective, opening on a bustling midweek morning at the professional hockey team's corporate headquarters. Connor is attending a mandatory marketing and community outreach briefing, a side of the professional sports industry that requires him to dress in a sharp-tailored suit rather than his athletic gear. The team's public relations director is outlining an upcoming winter charity initiative where players will visit local youth hockey programs and children's hospitals across the Chicago area. Connor finds himself genuinely engaged in the presentation, realizing that his public platform can finally be used for meaningful, authentic community support rather than the shallow, status-driven marketing stunts dictated by his old university fraternity. The primary conflict of the chapter develops when Connor returns to the locker room after the briefing and is pulled aside by the team's head coach for a serious evaluation. The coach notes that while Connor's performance on the ice has been spectacular and his recent game-winning goal secured a massive victory, the upcoming schedule is the most brutal stretch of the regular season, featuring 4 away games and 5 nights across different time zones. The coach emphasizes that the physical and mental stamina required for a rookie's first professional road trip often breaks their momentum. He challenges Connor to maintain his sharp tactical focus and emotional discipline while being isolated from his usual support systems, testing whether the rookie can truly survive the grueling lifestyle of the professional league. The narrative shifts to the following evening as Connor packs his travel bags in the high-rise apartment, the impending departure casting a bittersweet atmosphere over the home. This will be the longest period of physical separation he and Taylor have faced since moving to Chicago. As he double-checks his gear, he notices that Taylor has quietly slipped a small, handwritten note into the pocket of his travel blazer, filled with words of encouragement and a reminder of the unyielding foundation they share. The simple, thoughtful gesture completely eases the underlying anxiety of the grueling travel schedule, demonstrating how their partnership remains completely functional and supportive, even when faced with professional separation. The chapter reaches its emotional peak in the early hours of the morning just before the team bus departs for the airport. Taylor wakes up early to see him off, standing with him in the warm glow of the apartment entryway while the winter wind howls outside the glass. Connor pulls her into a fierce, lingering embrace, holding her close against his chest as if to anchor her memory, before he steps into the high-stakes environment of the road trip. He tells her that no matter how many miles or time zones sit between them over the coming week, his heart remains completely in this apartment and that the thought of coming home to her will carry him through every grueling shift on the ice. The chapter concludes from Connor's viewpoint as he steps onto the elevator and looks back at her radiant, supportive smile, his mind filled with an absolute, unshakable certainty that they have built a love strong enough to withstand any distance the professional world can throw at them. Chapter 33 returns to Taylor Marsh's perspective, opening on a quiet, freezing afternoon inside the high-rise apartment. With Connor away on his intense 4-game road trip across the country, the living space feels incredibly vast and unusually still. The silence is a stark contrast to the lively rhythm they have built together over the last few months. However, instead of letting the physical isolation trigger her past patterns of loneliness or anxiety, Taylor channels her energy entirely into her academic and professional goals. She uses the quiet time to meticulously draft the presentation slides for her upcoming regional psychology conference, finding a deep sense of fulfillment in the independent life and identity she's forging for herself in Chicago. The primary conflict of the chapter intensifies during her midweek shift at the community mental health clinic. Her supervisor assigns her to take the lead on an intake assessment for a new patient, a university student who has recently dropped out due to severe, debilitating panic attacks brought on by intense family pressure. As Taylor conducts the interview, the students' descriptions of trying to live up to an impossible family legacy while completely erasing her own desires hit incredibly close to home, instantly reminding Taylor of the corporate warfare Connor just escaped with his father. Balancing her profound personal empathy with the necessary professional boundaries of a clinician tests Taylor's emotional maturity to its absolute limit, forcing her to rely heavily on her training to remain a steady, objective anchor for the struggling girl. The narrative shifts to late that evening when Taylor returns to the empty apartment, her mind emotionally exhausted from the weight of the clinic session. Just as she settles onto the sofa with a warm blanket, her laptop screen lights up with an incoming video call from Connor. The connection is slightly grainy, broadcasting from a nondescript hotel room in a different time zone after his third consecutive away game. Despite the visible exhaustion etched into the lines of his face and the heavy ice pack taped to his knee, Connor's expression lights up with absolute joy the moment Taylor answers, instantly bridging the physical distance between them. The chapter reaches its emotional peak during this late-night digital conversation as they exchange the triumphs and burdens of their week apart. Connor shares the grueling reality of the road trip, admitting that the veteran players on the opposing teams have been playing incredibly dirty, but he proudly tells her that he kept his composure and scored an essential assist that secured a team victory. Taylor, in turn, opens up about her breakthrough intake session at the clinic, explaining how helping the new patient made her fully appreciate the beautiful, healthy boundaries they have fought so hard to establish in their own lives. Connor listens with deep reverence, telling her that hearing her voice is the only thing that makes the chaotic, transient lifestyle of a professional athlete feel bearable. The chapter concludes from Taylor's perspective as they leave the video connection open while they drift off to sleep in their respective cities, her heart completely full and secure, knowing that no amount of physical distance or professional demand can shake the unbreakable foundation of their partnership. Chapter 34 shifts back to Connor Edwards' perspective, opening on the final, exhausting leg of the team's intense road trip. The narrative finds Connor sitting in a window seat on the charter plane as it descends through a thick layer of clouds back into Chicago. The grueling schedule of 4 games and 5 nights has taken a massive physical toll on his body, leaving his muscles aching and his mind completely drained from the constant tactical focus. Yet, as the familiar lights of the Chicago skyline appear through the gray mist, a profound wave of relief washes over him. He realizes that for the first time in his entire life, returning from a high-stakes athletic tour doesn't mean facing a cold, analytical critique from his father or a chaotic fraternity house. It means coming home to a true sanctuary. The primary conflict of the chapter unfolds when the team plane touches down and the players gather their equipment bags in the private hangar. The head coach calls a sudden impromptu meeting on the tarmac to announce the official roster adjustments for the upcoming home stretch. Because of Connor's exceptional discipline and his game-winning assist during the road trip, the coaching staff has decided to permanently elevate him to the second line, securing his position above several returning veteran players. While this promotion is a massive professional triumph, it also immediately increases the target on his back, drawing cold, resentful stares from the older teammates who have just been displaced. Connor stands his ground, accepting the promotion with a quiet, respectful nod, fully prepared to handle the locker room friction. The narrative shifts to later that morning when Connor finally walks through the door of the high-rise apartment. The space is warm, filled with the comforting scent of fresh coffee and the quiet rustle of Taylor turning the pages of her research papers. The moment she looks up and sees him standing there, she drops her books and rushes across the room. Connor drops his heavy travel bag, meeting her halfway and lifting her completely off the ground in a fierce, desperate embrace, burying his face in the crook of her neck as the remaining exhaustion of the road trip completely melts away from his body. The chapter reaches its emotional peak as they sit together on the living room floor, surrounded by his unpacked gear. Connor shares the news of his permanent promotion to the second line, admitting that while the professional stakes have never been higher, he no longer feels any of the suffocating pressure that used to paralyzing him. He tells Taylor that knowing she's building her own independent, brilliant career in the same city gives him the mental strength to face the cutthroat reality of the professional league. Taylor cups his face in her hands, her eyes bright with intense pride as she reminds him that they are no longer survival partners from Briar University. They are successful professionals conquering their dreams as equals. The chapter concludes from Connor's viewpoint as they lean back against the sofa, watching the winter sun break through the Chicago clouds, his heart overflowing with an absolute, unshakable peace as he accepts that their shared sanctuary is completely unbreakable. Chapter 35 returns to Taylor Marsh's perspective, opening on a bustling morning inside the massive downtown convention center, where the Regional Psychology Conference is being hosted. The environment is intensely professional and high stakes, filled with hundreds of prominent clinicians, researchers, and graduate students from across the country discussing advanced therapeutic models. Taylor stands near the entrance of the main exhibition hall, dressed in a sharp blazer, holding the final printed layout of her research abstract on peer isolation and cognitive restructuring. Looking around the crowded room, she experiences a profound moment of clarity. The crippling social anxiety that once dominated her existence on Briar's Greek Row has been completely transformed into a deep, focused passion for her discipline. The primary conflict of the chapter develops during the afternoon poster session when a group of senior clinicians and a notoriously critical professor from a rival university gather around Taylor's presentation board. The professor delivers a sharp, skeptical critique of her methodology, questioning whether a first-year graduate student has the clinical depth to accurately analyze long-term cognitive behavioral outcomes in young adults. Sensing the eyes of her peers on her, Taylor feels a brief flash of heat in her chest. However, instead of shrinking back or doubting her intellect, she relies entirely on her extensive clinical hours from the community clinic. She articulates a flawless, highly sophisticated defense of her data, completely neutralizing the skepticism and earning a respectful nod from the senior panel. The narrative shifts to later that evening as the celebratory atmosphere takes over the downtown area. While many of her classmates head out to a crowded networking mixer at a nearby lounge, Taylor slips away from the convention center, eager to return to the quiet sanctuary of the high-rise apartment. Connor has spent the afternoon at a mandatory team physical therapy session to manage the lingering soreness in his shoulder, and she's desperate to share her academic victory with him in person. When she walks through the door, she finds the apartment bathed in the warm, ambient glow of the living room lamps, with a beautifully arranged dinner waiting on the kitchen island. The chapter reaches its emotional peak as Connor walks out of the kitchen, wearing a comfortable hoodie instead of his sleek arena suits, his face lighting up with absolute pride the moment he reads the triumphant expression on her face. Before she can even speak, he crosses the room, sweeps her into his arms, and spins her around, laughing as she details how she stood her ground against the skeptical panel of professors. He tells her that watching her conquer her academic goals with such fierce independence inspires him more than any professional victory on the ice. Sitting together on the sofa later that night, Taylor rests her head against his shoulder, listening to the steady hum of the city below. The chapter concludes from Taylor's perspective as she realizes that their love has evolved far beyond a mechanism for surviving college. They have built a brilliant, balanced partnership where each person's success is a shared triumph, leaving them completely unified as they face the future. Chapter 36 shifts back to Connor Edwards' perspective, opening on a remarkably crisp, clear winter morning as the professional hockey season moves into its final, most grueling stretch. The narrative begins inside the franchise's downtown practice facility, where the intense atmosphere is thick with anticipation and focus. The coaching staff has called a mandatory early morning meeting to analyze the updated league standings, revealing that the team is only a few critical points away from securing a definitive spot in the upcoming postseason playoffs. Connor stands by the rink doors, listening intently to the head coach's strategic breakdown, feeling the massive weight of professional expectations resting on his shoulders. He can feel the physical fatigue built up from months of high-intensity play, but his mind remains sharp and clear, driven by an authentic desire to contribute to the team's collective success. The primary conflict of the chapter develops during a high-stakes afternoon scrimmage when the team's star forward suffers a sudden severe hamstring injury during a fast-paced offensive rush. The unexpected medical emergency forces the coaching staff to make an immediate tactical decision on the bench. The head coach locks eyes with Connor, instructing him to step up and take over the coveted first-line center position for the remainder of the practice session and the upcoming weekend matches. This sudden promotion represents an incredible leap in responsibility, thrusting Connor into the spotlight where he must seamlessly coordinate with the team's highest-paid, most experienced veteran players. The pressure in the arena shifts instantly, with several senior teammates watching closely to see if the rookie will buckle under the elevated tactical demands. The narrative shifts to the locker room after the intense session concludes, where Connor faces the immediate psychological fallout of his new role. While some of the younger players offer quick congratulations, a few of the veteran athletes maintain a cold, distant silence, creating a palpable undercurrent of friction in the room. Navigating this delicate locker room hierarchy tests Connor's emotional maturity to its absolute limit. Instead of attempting to appease the veterans with forced humility or letting their cold behavior rattle his focus, he maintains a quiet, respectful professionalism. Staying late on the ice to study the first-line power play playbooks and demonstrating his absolute dedication to the franchise through hard work rather than words. The chapter reaches its emotional peak late that evening when Connor finally returns to the high-rise apartment, emotionally drained from the intense day of transition. He finds Taylor sitting at the kitchen island, meticulously reviewing a complex clinical case study for her advanced graduate seminar. The moment he explains the sudden injury to the star forward and his subsequent elevation to the first line, Taylor drops her academic notes and wraps her arms tightly around his neck. She looks into his eyes with an unshakable, fierce pride, reminding him that he has earned this moment through pure talent and resilience, completely independent of his family's corporate shadow. Her absolute belief acts as an immediate emotional anchor, stripping away the lingering anxiety of the professional locker room friction. The chapter concludes from Connor's viewpoint as they stand together by the window, watching the city traffic crawl through the snow-dusted streets of Chicago, his heart filled with an absolute certainty that with Taylor standing firmly by his side, he is fully prepared to lead the team onto the ice and conquer the high-stakes challenges of the postseason race. Chapter 37 returns to Taylor Marsh's perspective, opening on a crisp early spring morning as the heavy winter snow finally begins to melt away from the banks of Lake Michigan. Inside the apartment, the atmosphere is charged with a quiet, focused energy as both Taylor and Connor prepare for the most demanding weeks of their respective semesters. Taylor is sitting at her desk, surrounded by advanced textbooks on family systems and clinical trauma, preparing for her final comprehensive examinations. As she watches Connor methodically pack his athletic gear for the first official game of the playoff series, she reflects on how profoundly their daily lives have shifted. The chaotic defensive uncertainty that defined their early days at Briar University has matured into a structured, deeply supportive partnership where they seamlessly balance each other's high-stakes ambitions. The primary conflict of the chapter unfolds later that afternoon during Taylor's advanced clinical practicum at the community mental health clinic. Her supervisor conducts a high-intensity, live-monitored peer simulation where Taylor must step into the role of lead therapist for a family experiencing severe relational breakdown and systemic communication failure. Sitting in the center of the observation room under the gaze of her professors and classmates, Taylor initially feels a sharp surge of adrenaline. The complex overlapping emotional demands of the simulated clients mimic the exact patterns of psychological manipulation she spent years observing within her old sorority and Connor's family. Relying heavily on her deep capacity for empathy and her rigorous academic training, Taylor maintains absolute professional composure, successfully de-escalating the simulated conflict and earning the highest marks from the clinic director. The narrative shifts to the early evening as Taylor navigates the bustling crowds outside the downtown hockey arena, rushing from the clinic to secure her seat before the first playoff game begins. The stadium is a sea of roaring fans, flashing stadium lights, and intense media presence, capturing the massive scale of the professional postseason. When Connor skates onto the ice, now officially anchoring the first-line center position, the crowd erupts into absolute chaos. Throughout the first two periods, the game is incredibly brutal and fast-paced, with the opposing team employing a suffocating defensive strategy that directly targets Connor. Taylor watches from the stands, her heart racing but her confidence unshakable as she sees Connor maintain absolute emotional discipline, refusing to let the physical provocation rattle his focus. The chapter reaches its emotional peak during the final minutes of the third period, with the score tied and the playoff victory hanging in the balance. Executing a brilliant deceptive maneuver at the blue line, Connor outpaces two veteran defensemen and delivers a flawless, lightning-fast pass to the team captain, who drives the puck straight into the net for the game-winning goal just as the buzzer sounds. The arena explodes into a frenzy of celebration, but as the team mobs Connor on the ice, his eyes immediately scan the lower bowl until he locks eyes with Taylor, raising his stick in a quiet, private salute. The chapter concludes from Taylor's perspective later that night, back in the quiet sanctuary of their apartment, as they share a late meal together on the living room floor, her heart filled with a profound joyous certainty that no matter how intense the professional and academic storms around them become, their unity remains absolutely unbreakable. Chapter 38 shifts back to Connor Edwards' perspective, opening on a tense, heavily overcast morning inside the team's executive briefing room. The franchise's front office has gathered the players to discuss the logistics for the upcoming second-round playoff series, which requires a cross-country flight to face their biggest rivals in New York. While the locker room is buzzing with the adrenaline of their recent victory, the team's general manager pulls Connor aside to deliver a complicated piece of news. His father's sports management agency has officially submitted a formal corporate bid to represent several of Connor's rookie teammates for their upcoming contract extensions. The realization that his father is using his professional success to worm his way back into Connor's immediate athletic circle introduces a sharp, familiar undercurrent of stress into the high-stakes environment. The primary conflict of the chapter intensifies during a grueling multi-hour tactical practice session on the ice. The head coach is pushing the first line to their absolute physical limits, installing a highly complex defensive zone coverage designed to neutralize New York's explosive offense. Connor is skating hard, but his mind is partially preoccupied with the impending corporate ambush from his family, leading to a rare miscommunication with his left winger during a critical breakout drill. The head coach immediately blows his whistle, the sharp blast echoing through the empty arena, and demands absolute accountability from Connor. The moment forces Connor to confront the lingering emotional residue of his childhood, realizing that he cannot allow his father's corporate shadow to compromise his dedication to the team or his standing with his coaches. The narrative shifts to later that afternoon when Connor decides to proactively manage the situation rather than retreating into silence. Instead of allowing his father's agency to create friction among the rookies, Connor calls an impromptu meeting with his line mates in the player lounge. With absolute transparency and a quiet, mature authority, he lays out the reality of his father's transactional management style, advising his teammates to make their agency decisions based purely on their own career security, rather than any perceived family obligation to him. This professional, completely unselfish move completely neutralizes any potential locker room awkwardness, solidifying Connor's position as a genuine, respected leader within the rookie cohort. The chapter reaches its emotional peak late that evening back at the high-rise apartment, where the quiet domestic atmosphere provides an immediate relief from the corporate drama. Connor finds Taylor sitting on the living room rug, surrounded by printed articles and statistical data for her final clinical research presentation. Exhausted from the day's mental and physical battles, Connor drops down beside her and rests his head against her knees, opening up completely about his father's relentless attempts to leverage his career. Taylor listens with a calm, fierce devotion, running her fingers through his hair and reminding him that his father's desperate corporate tactics only prove that Connor has completely won his freedom. She emphasizes that his ability to protect his teammates and maintain his focus is a testament to the incredible man he has become outside of his family's influence. The chapter concludes from Connor's viewpoint as he holds her close in the quiet warmth of their home, his mind clearing entirely as he prepares for the New York series, fully aware that no corporate manipulation can touch the unshakable foundation they have built together. Chapter 39 returns to Taylor Marsh's perspective, opening on a tense morning as she prepares for the final, most critical milestone of her academic year, the defense of her comprehensive clinical research project before a panel of senior faculty members. The high-rise apartment is quiet, save for the sound of rain tapping against the glass, reflecting the intense insular focus that has taken over her life. Connor has already departed for New York for the start of the second-round playoff series, leaving Taylor to face this academic hurdle on her own. Standing before the mirror in her professional attire, she notes that the paralyzing self-doubt that used to define her during her time at Briar University has completely vanished, replaced by a calm, grounded confidence in her own intellect and clinical training. The primary conflict of the chapter unfolds inside the sterile, intimidating atmosphere of the university's main presentation hall. Sitting across from three notoriously strict psychology professors, Taylor delivers a highly sophisticated, hour-long defense of her thesis on systemic family manipulation and its long-term impact on young adult cognitive development. Midway through the session, the head of the department launches into an aggressive line of questioning, deliberately trying to expose gaps in her clinical data. Instead of shrinking under the pressure or letting her voice waver, Taylor draws directly upon her real-world experiences at the community clinic and her deep understanding of human behavior, articulating a brilliant and yielding rebuttal that leaves the panel completely silenced and deeply impressed. The narrative shifts to the immediate aftermath of the presentation, where the committee officially awards Taylor a pass with highest distinction, solidifying her standing as one of the top graduate students in her cohort. Emerging from the university building into the cool evening air, she feels a profound sense of liberation, realizing she has officially claimed her own independent professional identity in Chicago. Her celebration, however, is cut short by a wave of anxiety for Connor, whose opening playoff game in New York is scheduled to broadcast in just under an hour. Rushing back to the apartment, she flips on the television just in time to see the puck drop inside the hostile, roaring New York arena. The chapter reaches its emotional peak during the final, brutal minutes of the game's third period. The New York team plays an incredibly aggressive physical game, directly targeting Connor on the ice and resulting in a high-stakes, fast-paced showdown. With the score tied and only seconds remaining on the clock, Taylor watches with her breath caught in her throat as Connor absorbs a heavy hit near the boards, regains his footing with absolute resilience, and executes a brilliant, blind pass that sets up the game-winning goal for his teammate. The television screen flashes to a close-up of Connor celebrating on the ice, and the moment he looks directly toward the broadcast camera, Taylor knows without a doubt that he is sharing the victory with her across the miles. The chapter concludes from Taylor's perspective as she sits in the quiet warmth of their living room, her heart overflowing with a deep, unshakable peace, knowing that they have both successfully conquered their independent battles on the exact same day. Chapter 40 shifts back to Connor Edwards' perspective, opening on the momentous morning immediately following the team's triumphant return from the New York playoff series. The high-rise apartment is filled with a soft, celebratory energy as the bright spring morning light pours across the hardwood floors. Connor is sitting at the kitchen island, his body nursing the deep physical bruises of the postseason, but his mind is completely at ease. The franchise has officially secured a week-long break before the conference finals begin, granting him a rare, invaluable window of complete rest. For the first time all season, he doesn't have a morning skate or a film review session scheduled, allowing him to fully immerse himself in the quiet, domestic life he and Taylor have fought so hard to protect. The primary conflict of the chapter focuses on a profound, structural transition in their relationship as they officially close the door on the lingering shadows of their undergraduate past. Taylor receives a final package from her old university housing office containing the last of her personal belongings left behind in New England. Unpacking the box together on the living room rug, they find a collection of old Greek life event programs, campus flyers, and relics from the malicious party dare that originally forced them together at Briar. Looking at these items, Connor realizes how insignificant and small that old world feels compared to the massive, authentic life they have established in Chicago. Together, they make the conscious, symbolic decision to discard the remnants of that toxic environment, permanently separating their future from the superficial standards of their past peers. The narrative shifts to later that afternoon when Connor receives an unexpected, formal letter from his family's corporate legal team. Rather than another aggressive attempt to control his athletic career or alienate Taylor, the document is a cold, strictly professional acknowledgement of the boundaries Connor established in the stadium corridor. His father's agency has officially withdrawn its bids to represent Connor's teammates, signaling a complete, definitive retreat from his professional life. Reading the clinical text, Connor expects to feel a lingering surge of anger or resentment. Instead, he feels absolutely nothing but a profound, liberating sense of closure. He is finally entirely independent. A self-made professional athlete playing on his own terms, answerable only to his coaches, his teammates, and himself. The chapter reaches its emotional peak late that evening as Connor surprises Taylor by booking a private dinner at an upscale, quiet restaurant overlooking the Chicago River to celebrate her passing her comprehensive exams with highest distinction. Dressed in a sharp-tailored suit, Connor looks across the table at Taylor, completely captivated by her confidence, her brilliant intellect, and the unyielding strength she has developed over the past year. He realizes that their partnership has completely transformed them both. They are no longer two broken individuals hiding from social judgment, but a powerful, unified team capable of conquering any high-stakes environment. The chapter concludes from Connor's viewpoint as they walk hand-in-hand along the illuminated river walk, the city lights reflecting off the water around them, his heart beating with a profound, absolute certainty that their love is no longer a temporary sanctuary, but an unbreakable, lifelong foundation. Chapter 41 returns to Taylor Marsh's perspective, opening on a remarkably serene afternoon as the Chicago spring officially begins to bloom. The high-rise apartment is bathed in a warm, golden light, and the floor-to-ceiling windows offer a clear view of sailboats returning to the blue waters of Lake Michigan. The atmosphere carries an unshakable sense of completion and new beginnings. With her comprehensive graduate exam successfully conquered and Connor's team preparing for the final, definitive stretch of the postseason tournament, the frantic defensive pace of the past year has finally settled into a deep, harmonious rhythm. Taylor stands at the kitchen island, organizing her new clinical internship placement schedule for the upcoming academic year, feeling an immense sense of pride in the independent professional life she has established entirely on her own merit. The primary conflict of the chapter is deeply internal and reflective, serving as the emotional climax of Taylor's personal evolution. She receives an unexpected notification on her phone, a digital invitation to the upcoming Briar University formal graduation ceremony and alumni gala back in New England. Looking at the digital card, Taylor experiences a profound wave of clarity. A year ago, the thought of facing her former sorority sisters and the toxic social circles that had once systematically excluded and humiliated her would have triggered a paralyzing spiral of anxiety. Now, she looks at the invitation and feels absolutely nothing but a peaceful, detached indifference. The opinion of that superficial world no longer carries a single ounce of leverage over her self-worth. She officially declines the invitation with a steady hand, recognizing that her true home, her community, and her future are firmly rooted right here in Chicago. The narrative shifts to the early evening when Connor arrives home after a final, high-intensity tactical meeting at the team facility. The energy he brings into the apartment is light and completely unburdened. The fierce, protective walls he used to maintain against his family's corporate interference have completely dissolved, leaving him relaxed and entirely grounded. He drops his athletic bag by the entryway and immediately crosses the room to pull Taylor into a warm, lingering embrace, kissing the top of her head as they stand together in the center of their sanctuary. They spend the evening cooking dinner together, sharing effortless conversation about her upcoming clinical cases and his strategic layout for the final playoff games, showcasing a flawless, mature partnership built on absolute equality and mutual respect. The chapter reaches its emotional peak late that night as they sit together on the balcony wrapped in a large fleece blanket while the cool city breeze sweeps off the lake. Connor reaches into his pocket and pulls out a small, beautifully engraved silver key ring holding a new set of keys to the apartment, officially symbolizing their permanent commitment to the home and the life they have co-created from the ground up. He looks at her with an intense, quiet devotion, expressing that every single victory he achieves on the ice is entirely grounded in the absolute peace and security she provides him every day. The chapter concludes from Taylor's perspective as she rests her head against his shoulder, watching the illuminated Chicago skyline sparkle against the dark night sky, her heart overflowing with a profound, unshakable certainty that they have successfully transcended their painful pasts to build an unbreakable, lifelong love. Chapter 42 shifts back to Connor Edwards' perspective, serving as the definitive concluding chapter of the narrative and capturing the ultimate culmination of his personal, athletic, and romantic journeys. The story opens on a brilliant sun-drenched Saturday morning in early summer, a year after Connor and Taylor first arrived in Chicago. The professional hockey postseason has officially concluded, and the city is buzzing with celebratory energy. Inside the high-rise apartment, the atmosphere is incredibly light and peaceful. Connor stands by the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out over the sparkling expanse of Lake Michigan, deeply feeling the profound transformation his life has undergone. He's no longer the guarded, emotionally detached athlete who used careless charm as a shield. He has become a grounded, completely independent man who has claimed absolute ownership of his destiny. The primary focus of the chapter centers on a significant milestone event, an intimate evening gathering hosted at a quiet, upscale venue downtown to celebrate both the conclusion of the hockey season and Taylor's official transition into her advanced clinical residency. Instead of the chaotic, status-driven crowds that populated their past university circles, the guest list is intentionally small, consisting entirely of true allies. Connor's rookie line mates, the team captain, Taylor's close colleagues from the mental health clinic, and a few authentic friends who have supported their journey. Standing among people who value them for their true character rather than their social pedigree or family leverage provides Connor with a deep, comforting sense of validation. The superficial world of Briar University and the toxic influence of his father's corporate agency have faded into total obscurity, completely powerless against the authentic community they have built. During the gathering, Connor takes a moment to step away from the crowd with the team captain, who offers him a profound word of respect regarding his rookie performance and his exceptional leadership on and off the ice. The captain notes that Connor's ability to maintain his emotional discipline and protect his teammates from external media and corporate distractions has solidified his future as a pillar of the franchise. This professional acknowledgement is incredibly meaningful to Connor, serving as final verification that he has successfully established an elite athletic career entirely on his own terms, completely free from his father's rigid blueprint. The chapter reaches its absolute emotional peak late that night when Connor and Taylor return to their dark, quiet apartment. The city lights cast a soft ambient glow across the living room as they step out onto the balcony together, the warm summer breeze carrying the distant hum of Chicago below. Connor pulls Taylor tightly against his chest, feeling the steady, reassuring rhythm of her breath. Overwhelmed by an intense wave of gratitude for the woman who stood as his unyielding anchor through every high-stakes storm, he reflects on the malicious college party dare that had ironically thrown them together, marveling at how a situation designed to humiliate them became the catalyst for their ultimate salvation. Looking out over the illuminated skyline, Connor speaks from the heart, telling Taylor that while playing on the ice gives him purpose, the sanctuary they have created within these walls is his true home. He promises her his absolute lifelong devotion, affirming that they will continue to face every future challenge as complete and equal partners. The narrative concludes from Connor's viewpoint as Taylor smiles up at him, her eyes filled with an unshakable peace and complete security, leaving them both standing together in the warmth of the summer night, entirely free from the past and perfectly unified as they step into their brilliant future. Chapter 43 returns to Taylor Marsh's perspective, serving as an extended, comforting epilogue that grounds the entire narrative in a sense of permanent domestic bliss. The story picks up on a lazy Sunday morning a few weeks after the summer gathering, with the brilliant Chicago sun warming the apartment and a gentle breeze rustling the curtains. The high-stakes intensity of the professional hockey postseason and the grueling academic pressure of her comprehensive exams have completely dissolved into the past. Taylor is sitting curled up on the living room sofa, watching Connor effortlessly navigate the kitchen as he prepares a casual breakfast. There is a profound, beautiful simplicity to the moment that highlights just how far they have traveled from the defensive, survival-driven dynamics of their past life. The primary theme of the chapter is the deep internal peace that comes from absolute security. As they enjoy their breakfast by the window, Taylor receives a casual email update from a former classmate detailing the chaotic, predictable drama still unfolding within their old university circles back in New England. Reading about the superficial competitions for status and the fleeting transactional relationships that used to cause her so much anxiety, Taylor feels a wave of profound gratitude. The contrast between that toxic, performative world and the authentic, emotionally mature sanctuary she shares with Connor is staggering. She deletes the email without a second thought, realizing that her identity is no longer defined by what she survived, but by the brilliant, independent life she's actively creating. The narrative shifts to the afternoon as they decide to take advantage of the beautiful summer weather, leaving the high-rise building behind to walk through a vibrant lakeside park. Strolling hand-in-hand through the green spaces, anonymous among the crowds of families and local residents, Connor is completely relaxed, his posture entirely free of the rigid defensiveness he used to carry. They talk quietly about the future, discussing her upcoming clinical research publications and his plans for the team's voluntary late summer training camp. Their conversation flows with an easy, unbreakable rhythm, showcasing a flawless partnership where two independent, successful individuals exist as true equals, entirely unburdened by external manipulation or family expectations. The chapter reaches its final emotional peak late that evening as the twilight sky turns a deep, velvety purple over Lake Michigan. Standing together on their balcony, watching the city lights flicker to life across the expanse of Chicago, Connor wraps his arms around Taylor's waist from behind, pulling her back against his chest. Taylor leans into his warmth, closing her eyes and listening to the steady, grounding rhythm of his heartbeat. She reflects on the malicious party dare that had once threatened to break her, marveling at the beautiful irony that the worst moment of her college life had ultimately led her to this absolute, unshakable peace. The narrative officially concludes from Taylor's perspective as Connor presses a tender kiss to her temple, leaving them wrapped in the quiet security of the summer night, completely unified and looking forward to a lifetime of shared horizons. The epilogue shifts to a dual perspective, seamlessly blending Taylor and Connor's viewpoints as it leaps exactly 3 years into the future. The setting opens on a magnificent sun-drenched June afternoon on the outskirts of Chicago, where the couple has recently transitioned from their downtown high-rise into a beautiful, permanent home featuring an expansive backyard that looks out toward a quiet tree-lined lake. The air is warm and filled with the scent of blooming jasmine, casting a serene, established atmosphere over the property. Taylor is standing on the rear patio, watching the golden sunlight dance across the water, reflecting on the incredible stability and profound peace that has defined their lives since leaving the chaotic noise of their undergraduate years completely behind. The narrative establishes the brilliant independent success both partners have achieved through their unwavering dedication. Taylor is now a fully licensed, highly respected clinical psychologist, operating a thriving private practice specializing in young adult identity development and relational trauma. Her academic research has been widely published, allowing her to serve as a steady, objective anchor for individuals fighting the same systemic pressures she once overcame. Meanwhile, Connor has solidified his status as an elite, indispensable franchise pillar for his professional hockey team, recently signing a massive long-term contract extension entirely negotiated on his own terms. He has completely rewritten his athletic legacy, valued by his coaches and teammates for his authentic leadership, absolute emotional discipline, and fierce integrity. The primary focus of the epilogue centers on an intimate milestone celebration hosted at their new home to mark the 3rd anniversary of their move to Chicago. The gathering is a beautiful reflection of the healthy, unconditional community they have intentionally curated. Taylor's mother is present, her face glowing with genuine happiness as she watches her daughter thrive, completely liberated from the shadow of family expectations. Connor's close teammates, their spouses, and Taylor's professional colleagues mingle effortlessly on the lawn, creating a vibrant tapestry of true allies who value the couple solely for their character. The absolute absence of Connor's father or any remnants of their toxic university past serves as a silent, powerful testament to the unbreakable boundaries they established years ago. The narrative reaches its ultimate emotional peak late in the evening as the guests depart, leaving the estate wrapped in a profound, tranquil silence. Connor walks out onto the darkened patio, carrying 2 glasses of wine, and slips his arms around Taylor's waist, pulling her back against his chest as the cool evening breeze rustles the lakeside trees. They stand together in the dark, watching the stars reflect perfectly on the still surface of the water, completely unified in their shared sanctuary. Connor pulls a small velvet box from his pocket, opening it to reveal a classic brilliant diamond ring that symbolizes not a sudden transition, but the permanent, unshakable culmination of the vows they have silently lived every day. Looking into her eyes with a deep, quiet devotion that has only intensified with time, Connor asks her to officially step into the rest of their lives together. Taylor smiles through tears of absolute joy, accepting the ring as they share a lingering, passionate kiss that contains the entirety of their journey. The story concludes with absolute finality as they look out over their horizon, entirely free from the ghosts of their past, completely fulfilled as individuals, and permanently bound together as true equals ready to embrace a lifetime of unshakable love.